Voted entirely to the 2014 proposed budget. You'll recall that last Monday night, Mayor Ava Freisinger presented her last budget after being involved in, I guess that was her 16th. This is the first time that we are televising our budget deliberations. There will be a number of workshops, 3, as we work our way through the budget. The organization of the workshop has changed from how we have typically done this in the past. We will be looking more at funds rather than the department budgets and the specifics, although there will be 3 special presentations this evening. There will be a police overview provided by Chief Ayers, an overview on our Development Services Department by John Minato, and then our Economic Development Director, Keith Niven, will provide an economic development overview. We'll start with a general overview from our Finance Director, Diane Marcotte. But before we do that, I would just like to point out that, again, this is the first time this has been televised, and this will be the first time that we've actually taken audience comments on the budget, and those will be taken at the end of the presentations and the council's discussion on those presentations. It's important that as we go through the presentations and the special and the overview, that if there are questions, you identify those questions. There are department directors here who may be called upon to answer those questions, but we want to make sure that we capture them because all of the department heads are not here this evening. So with that, we will begin our formal budget deliberations with an overview from our Finance Director, Diane Marcotte. Diane?
Good evening, and thank you. I feel like we maybe should have some music or something to kind of roll this off tonight. The first thing is included, one of your handouts are some changes to the document as a result of some second eyes looking at the document. If you look at pages 2-6 and 2-7 in the additional handout, the only change that is reflected there was we budgeted for the flashing yellow arrows that we'll be talking about on the 24th. Somehow or another it got connected to the Street Improvement Fund, but it's really related to the ITS fund, so we had to make that minor correction there. And then one of the other documents is the street fund ending fund balance. We had some of our, the title and the caption was incorrect. And then the last couple of sheets is our salary schedule for 2014. When we brought the data over from a worksheet, some of the numbers came over incorrectly, and upon secondarily review, we noted that. So these are the changes that need to be made to your budget document. So starting out for tonight, in your budget book there are a lot
Diane, will these changes be posted electronically and updated in the budget that's on the website also?
Yes, these will. Some of
Are you, updating things on the website, we never know what the most current is. Is there some way that we can flag them so we know, so I can look and see if they were done yesterday or today, or so there's a way to know if it's the most current?
Yes, one of the things we've had some discussions about at the staff level is how do we really kind of keep everything up to date. So at this point in time, unless something comes to light during the council presentations, this would be the only update unless there was something else that was significant. There are some grammatical errors. There's some little errors that we've noted along the way, but they aren't material. They're more Scrivener's errors, and so we chose to leave those alone until the final budget. So one of the things is in your 2014 proposed budget, there are a lot of new pieces of information, and I would encourage you to take a look at them. We expanded a lot of the narrative in a lot of the individual departments. We included a lot more information on accomplishments in 2013, as well as the work plan for 2014. Also, in the overview summary pages, as I indicated, and it was also part of your update sheet, one of the things we did was add a couple of new schedules that talks about the revenues by source and the expenditure by source. So those are new schedules that we've included in the document so that you have a sense of how much we're spending on salary and benefits, how much we're spending on intergovernmental charges or capital projects, as well as what portion of our overall revenue is related to taxes versus related to charges and services. And then we also significantly expanded the narrative on the general fund revenue, giving you a sense, more detailed information for those that are really interested in on the sources of the revenue and some of our assumptions and predictions for our estimates for 2014. So those are just some changes that we've included in the 2014 as compared to the 2013. So kind of rolling forward, one of the great things is that the city of Issaquah is a very large corporation. Our proposed annual budget, exclusive ending fund balance, is a little over $98 million. And it's always amazing to me when I work with different cities in the past, when you look at it from the fact that we're a corporation and we're operating and spending $98 million, it really becomes an obligation on the policymakers as well as staff to ensure that those expenditures are spent wisely. Just a little bit of an overview. We eliminated some funds during 2013. This budget includes individual budgets for 32 funds. 11 of our funds are related to capital projects. 10 funds are what I would call operational, like our street fund, our water operating fund, general fund. There are 6 funds related to managing our debt between GO debt and revenue bond debt. 4 of them are related to internal services and to capital and operating funds. An internal service fund is a fund that provides services like our risk management, our self-insurance, our workers' comp. They are funds that have a benefit to most of the other funds. And then the last one is we have our Ruth Keys Fund. Well, also I wanted to bring to your attention in 2013 and then going into 2014, this would be the first full year of our medical self-insurance. As of October of this year, as of October 1st of this month, all employees in the city are now part of the medical self-insurance fund. This is a relatively new fund, and we'll be talking about that on the 24th, where we're at, what type of information we're seeing, and the results of operation in that fund. But I just wanted to point out, of all the funds, that's probably, that's our newest fund. Going over to page 4. As shown here, the overall budget is $98 million, and as you can see, 37% of it is expenditures in our general fund, and you'll see later on that of that 37% in the general fund, a little over 60% of our costs are related to personnel and benefits. So we have a quite, and that's typical because the general fund typically provides the service versus our capital project fund, which does our bricks and mortar or our studies. And then the other largest group is our utility operations. When you look at that, that is about another 30 to 40%. And then we have our remaining other funds. The overall dollar amount in distribution is quite consistent with what we saw in 2013. There isn't any significant wow factors or changes from this year to next year. A little bit of the highlights is the general fund is we've included the 1% allowable increase in property taxes. And in the general fund, there is not a recommendation for any other changes in taxes or fees. We still continue to have a discussion with the council with regards to permit and development fees, and that is slated for the council's consideration to begin a workshop discussion in November. So the outcome of that has not been included when we get into the revenues. We did not include that.
I have a question. Are you talking to this thing? What was the CPI that the 1% property tax increase was based on? I assume it was positive since we're increasing it.
CPI came in a little bit over 2%. It was about 2.3.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the 1% obviously is the cap.
Right. Yeah, because it's either the lower of IPD or 1%. So the measure is the implicit price deflator, which traditionally runs lower than CPI. In fact, I think 2 years ago it ran negative, which was really difficult for a lot of communities that were at their maximum. So it caused, no one in the history of following that has ever seen a negative. So that was a real interesting situation. In our stormwater utility and our sewer utility, just a little bit of an overview. The last rate increase for our stormwater was in 2008, and for our sewer, the city portion was in 2003. At this point in time, we're not recommending any rate increases in any of our 3 utilities. One of the things that is very interesting is when we look at the funding of the capital projects, it's more of a philosophical discussion of whether we issue bonds so that future customers pay for a portion of our development as it occurs, or do you use rates? Heretofore, the city primarily has used rate revenue to support its capital projects. The last time, right now we currently don't have any outstanding debt in relationship to either our storm sewer or our stormwater sewer. So neither one of them have any outstanding debt. So any capital projects that we have done over the last many years is primarily done with rate revenue. In the water utility, the last rate increase was in 2011. And that was a 9%, and it had been many years prior to that before we had the last rate increase. Again, the capital projects are primarily funded with the revenue spin-off from the operations, and so in some cases we aren't always able to accomplish all of our projects in the capital facilities plan, but in this particular case, everything that was identified in 2014 in the capital facilities plan has been included in the budget. And then the last bond issue where we actually had dollars to do infrastructure development was back in 2001. So it's been over 12 years since we have had any outstanding debt. And then while we had some conversations a couple months ago about the creation of a contingency fund, at this point in time, we're not recommending any funding for the contingency fund. When we get into particularly the general fund revenue, there really doesn't appear to be an excess of revenue to do a set-aside. However, after we end the year and we truly know the results of operations, we may want to come back and make a recommendation, but at this point in time, we're not recommending anything. Boy, this is nice and neat. Some staffing changes. One of the things this budget does do is it was a 2-year commitment to provide some increase of police officers for public safety. In 2013, we funded 1 police officer, and in 2014, we're proposing funding the additional officer. We have proposed a start date of July 1st for that position. Additionally, we are recommending...
Question on that, Diane. Is that when the police officer would actually have completed his training and be ready to go on the street, or is that when we would hire someone and then they would begin their training, whatever required training they needed?
It would be the latter. It would be they would come on board July 1st and then go through their training program. The next position is the creation of a human services manager and sustainability as of July 1st. This does not require new funding. We, in the executive's office, we had Mark Hinthorn, who was our special projects and policy manager. Administration spent some time looking at what best to do with that position, and after a lot of careful consideration, some discussions with the community, and I know as well as the council, the administration is recommending that we create a human services manager position. We have a lot of needs in this community, and in the past we've had a part-time person, and particularly with some of the council goals that we have coming forward in 2014, having this additional person on staff would help towards accomplishing those goals. What we've also
And I noticed that person would come on board the 1st of July also.
yes.
What would be the impact if that person came on towards the end of the first quarter? And if you don't have the specifics on that, you can jot that down as a question.
It's about 30,000 a quarter. So net, salary and benefits are about $120,000.
Okay.
Also in the past, we've had 3 people at the in the city clerk's department, and we've spent a lot of time over the last year going through a lean process and working with various team members, and what we are recommending is that the duties and responsibility of the front desk, particularly in City Hall across the street, the main City Hall, is that those duties and responsibility get transferred to shared services. So it's taking the position that was formerly in the city clerk's department and reassigning it to shared services. So it is cost neutral. It is just simply reassigning that position. The other positions we've included 2 construction workers. These are new positions. The funding would come from a reallocation of professional services, and in fact, we believe that there'll be a savings of around $150,000 by bringing those positions in-house. Currently, we have consultants that we are paying an hourly rate to go out and do these inspections, and when we did a cost-benefit analysis, we determined it was actually cheaper to bring those positions in-house, particularly given the level of work that we have currently and we're expecting to have occur in 2014. It made a good business sense to include these positions.
Diane, excuse me. So these are, you label these as changes. Is it, these are the increases or changes? It's not a net out? Because you talked earlier about the one being transferred from clerk to this thing called shared services, which is new.
Yes.
Right? But what I don't see in here is there's no mention in your presentation about the one in parks. Looks like there's a new position in parks.
So that would be Margaret's former position, and it's not necessarily a new position. It would be, I think we just got the title, change the scope of the overall work that was being done.
Okay, so you're referring to the deputy parks director position?
So the deputy parks director position is Brian Johnson, and so he had a different.
Thank you. So that position did involve some reorganization of duties and responsibilities. He was given some additional duties and responsibilities this year, and then there were some position changes within the rec department that ended up producing some savings. So as a result of the reorg, there's actually a cost savings. You remember off the top of your head?
About 5 or 6
Yeah,
thousand.
yeah. It wasn't a significant amount of money, but it did reflect, I think, two things that they were thinking about in the Parks and Rec Department. One was succession planning, and so giving Brian the opportunity to have an expanded role within the department. And the second item was just the savings, the dollar savings.
Okay, so the way the budget document reads is it's one more FTE in administration and planning.
I can check that.
It is not an
Number.
addition, it's just a reclassification.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the document. It went from 2 to 3. So if it's reclassed from another part of parks, that's fine.
But what we can do, I know similar to what we've done in the past, I jotted down questions, and so if you'd like to continue that practice, we can come back with some
No,
answers to clarify that next
absolutely.
time. Okay.
Actually, I can answer that question.
Okay.
So what
So-
page are you on,
If
Diane?
you go to page 212 and 213, at the very bottom, under the recreation services, it's about the fourth line from the bottom. You will see we had a recreation division manager that is half-time in this department, and you will see that for 2014, it is 0. Then the other half of it, if you go to aquatics and pool, you will see the other half of the allocation of the recreation division manager. So the position was moved into planning and administration, but it was also reduced from aquatics, pool, and recreation services.
All right, thank you.
Does that make sense?
So minus a half, plus minus a half equals one new position
It
as
does,
the Deputy Parks Director.
correct. And then the budget also includes funding for a senior planner and looking at some of this would be a new position. So of the positions included in here, the police officer is an additional funding, and the senior planner would be additional funding. The other ones are resources that are available that have been reallocated. So the senior planner, the city administrator met with the Development Services Department about 2 months ago, and in walking through some of their workload, they had indicated that there have been a lot of new projects that they've been taking on, and some of the work I think they'll be talking about is they've also absorbed some of the work on Kahani and the urban designation. So they are in need of a senior planner to help them with their workload.
And yeah, I think DSD will be talking about that when they do their presentation. So if there's a little more information on that, they can provide it.
So one of the things we did when we were, Beth Ann and I in particular, when we were looking at how the city has done its accounting and how it has done its budgeting, there were some changes that we have made compared to the previous years. The first one in particular, it's called non-departmental. It's where we pay for our election costs, our costs for funding of several of our nonprofits. And typically, there was about $440,000 that we simply paid for the general fund for insurance. One of the things that we believe is important is to the degree that we can more accurately reflect the cost of managing the department, we wanted to be able to charge the cost there. So throughout the budget, we took around that $440,000, which actually ended up because we use a different basis. It was about $420,000 gets reallocated to all of the departments in the general fund, including the council. So a lot of our liability insurance, for instance, is based upon what we call workers' hours. And so we have an average, like for instance, for council, and so I think your budget absorbed about $8,000 in liability insurance. So in particular, when we're looking at different programs, you want to be able to get to full costing to the degree it's reasonable. And then we also went in and charged some of our other funds that heretofore, while they have we carry insurance for them. We haven't typically charged them, so we went ahead and included costs for them. A larger one that we'll be talking about later on is the general fund utilities. In city facilities, under Rick Patterson, we used to have 100% of all of our utilities flow there. And in particular, like when you look at our swimming pool, I think that is about $130,000 a year that we pay for gas and electric. So when looking at the swimming pool and determining what the costs are as compared to the revenue, if you're not including that $130,000, then you're really you're not really getting a good picture. So to the degree like Tibbetts Manor, Pickering Barn, the pool, those were ones where we were able to easily allocate. Now, one of the things that we're working on right now is the cost allocation plan. So the cost allocation plan would take costs like for City Hall Northwest, bundle them up, look at the departments that are benefiting, and then do an allocation. So that will be a project that we'll be working with Services and Safety when we get the final report to walk through what the changes are. So we're making small changes in particular. Probably the largest change we made is we sort of, as I say, we imploded Sheldon's department. We used to have what we call an internal service fund for public works engineering, and what that was a centralized place for all of the engineering costs for water operations, water capital, sewer operations capital, street operations and capital. What we did was, what was happening at the end of the year, and particularly with the auditors were wanting us to indicate specifically what part of his entire budget was related to what particular operation. Particularly last year, what we were having to do was we spent about 60 days going into that fund, analyzing it, and doing journal entries to move all of those costs. So this year we would like to try just simply doing budgeting in each of those funds rather than doing these back and forth transfers. Overall cost allocations is a major project with the state auditor. I think Joe in particular, Councilmember Faulkner, when he was there, he heard a lot of discussion about it, and I know Councilmember Butler did at the start of the audit. So cost allocation has become a very primary issue with the state auditor's office. They have been gracious enough to give us a little bit of time to make some additional improvements. Any questions on that?
So they've graciously given us a little bit of time to make how much time are we talking about?
We have to have a strategy in place probably by March or April of next year on how we're going to manage 2013 as well as 2014. Currently, all we're waiting on is the final cost allocation report so that we can begin to sit down with council. Because there may be some recommendations, for instance, there may be some recommendations to charge some funds for general fund support that the council may say, as a matter of policy, we choose not to do that. So that would be an example of a conversation we would have with the council, because it becomes a policy decision on the part of council, particularly with services provided by the general fund to other funds.
And going back to the general fund utilities, reallocating the utility costs to the departments or operations that use them, and you mentioned the pool as one that was a pretty big consumer of natural gas and electricity. Do we have an informal policy about the percent of our recreation programs that we cover by fees versus what portion is subsidized, and will that have an impact on that percentage?
Well, I think generally on operating programs, you want to recover 100% of the costs, and then there's a general overhead percentage that goes along with that too, and that depends on the program and where it's done. So I don't think we have recreation here tonight, but she is coming to the next meeting, and we could get you a direct answer to that question.
That'd be great.
Okay.
So it looks like you're going to shift now to 2014 council goals.
Yes.
But before you do that, are there any other council questions up to this point that, Josh?
Yeah, I just
Process-wise, I'm looking at the capital facilities plan. Is that discussion going to occur then at the next session or the session after? Maybe, what is it, up?
Up.
Now I'm good. Yeah, I'll start again. I'm looking at the capital facilities plan, and is that discussion going to occur on the 24th or the 29th in terms of syncing those items up or reprioritizing? Because there's a number of things that don't seem to match between the budget and the draft plan that's on the website.
It's, as you refer to it, it's exactly that. It was a plan, and a lot of that data and information was submitted by the departments back in March. So when we came through and were working on the budget, the departments were able to refine their numbers and their estimates. As I indicated earlier, particularly with the 3 utilities, all of the projects identified in the capital facilities plan for 2014 have been in fact funded. It's just that based upon where they were at in the design phase for 2013, based as of August compared to as of March, some of those numbers have actually changed. We'll be talking about some of the issues in the street fund and the capital improvement funds. One of the difficulties was that the transportation improvement plan is sort of a different purpose than the actual budget, in the sense that it's one of those documents where we're trying to include as much as we can in the hopes of getting grant funding. So some of the difficulty is there is just simply a resource limitation on how much we can actually get accomplished, and we'll be talking about that on the 24th.
Okay, yeah, because the transportation one was one issue, but my understanding is that was going to be updated, but I'm also looking at like public works operations related items, and your explanation makes sense insofar as some numbers have changed, because there were some things in here like the Highland Storage Shop that the CFP said it was going to be, I think, 90,000, and in the budget it's like 160,000. And
Yeah, and when you have that 6-month lag, it's really one of those things that anytime a document is printed, to some degree it's obsolete, because there's just no way to keep things up to date as staff is doing work every day. So we'll be having, particularly Sheldon and Brett will be here to kind of talk about their capital projects on the 24th.
Okay.
So with that, I will turn it over to Bob to kind of lead the discussion on City
Goals?
Council goals.
Good. So if you go to page 2-17, there's kind of an update on the 2014 City Council goals and some information on there. And I'll kind of walk through how some of these projects we anticipate getting done. Some of them are a little firmer than others, and that's primarily because as we start to go through these items, they're going to take some adjustment to the various departments' work plans, because as you see when we walk through these projects, some are going to be much more significantly led by the staff versus a new cost or expenditure affiliated with the department. And so they may have to make some adjustments to their work plans as we go forward to accomplish some of the goals. But these are in hierarchical order, as you may recall from your council goal setting session. And the first one is a long-range financial plan for operations and capital. The finance department actually started that in 2013 by doing the 5-year operating forecast. And so the operations piece has got a good start. We've already built a model for that. We'll be continuing to do that as we go forward. The second piece that really feeds into that is the cost allocation study, which is currently ongoing, and we anticipate getting that completed here by the end of the year. So the one that's really part of this goal that's going to take some additional time is the long-term capital plan, and there's sources affiliated with that. The finance department will be leading that process, and it's primarily the staff that will be doing that. We'll have several departments that are going to be looking at that. So, I mean, when you think about the feasibility study of the Issaquah City Campus, goal number 11 on there, that's going to be a multi-departmental effort, and it's going to feed into whatever the outcome is on the overall capital plan at some point down the road. In terms of measuring city services and reporting to our residents, we anticipate we'll be developing several performance metrics. It's being led by the executive department, primarily Charlie Bush, our deputy city administrator, for this upcoming year. And we'll be working with several departments. And actually, as you see the police report later tonight. They've started already taking a look at, how we start to define staffing as it relates to public safety. And that work was done with the staff there and John Greenwood, who's one of our management analysts. But as we start to go through and identify, what a safe community is and how we allocate resources to that, you'll start to see that get reflected in the final reports. We're also looking at having the communications department work with the various departments to develop some type of annual report. So there'd be some type of mechanism to do that. And while we certainly can't afford print document in the budget, we would anticipate looking at, like we do for the weekly Issaquah report, something electronically to our distribution network.
And so before you go to the next one, the work plan is very, very general. A lot of times it's helpful to identify which quarter you will be doing which activities, because it's hard for me to see how this plays out over the year. And to a certain extent, that goes with goal number 1 also. So I'm not looking for, a detailed flow chart, but just a general indication of when you would accomplish the major aspects of this, so that we can track it throughout the year. And if you don't have that information now, maybe, in the first quarter, you would develop a little more specificity around the schedule for accomplishing the work.
Yeah, we anticipated when we do that first quarter report to the council, we would have a lot more detail. There is, and we talk about it now, I guess, there's a kind of $90,000 unallocated, in terms of specifics, funding number in here that relates back to just the accomplishment of the city council goals. And one of the things that's a little different with the 2014 goals versus the 2013 goals is there's about 5 that you could point to and say, by the end of 2014, you could put a check mark to it and say they're done, Whereas the other 6 are more, they're multi-year, and I think they're multi-strategies that are involved with doing that. So, the long-range financial plan for ops and capital, I think by January 2015, council could look to the administration and say, did you get it done or not? Whereas a healthy community strategy and a neighborhood engagement plan, they're really multi-year efforts, and I think they're really a state of mind in terms of how council expects the administration to work towards the services that we provide across the city, that they would work towards achieving that goal. So the 90,000, some of these have got specific staffing associations with them, but the other 90 would relate to, for example, the marketing packet for Issaquah. So, skipping ahead to number 4 on the list, we would expect the Economic Development Department to put together an RFP for developing a marketing packet with a variety of sources in the first quarter of the year, and we'd start to put together a concept of what that starts to look like, and then maybe multi-phases in terms of what the actual expenditures are. And that would come out of the 90,000 that we'd be looking at that are kind of unallocated. The tourism plan, that's actually proposed to be funded out of the LTAC committee, a big chunk of that. The neighborhood parks plan, Parks and Recreation, is going to be leading that effort in 2014. The parks planner, which is, you can't call it a replacement for Margaret, who's really irreplaceable, but I think the focus is on that position. It's going to be a little different in terms of the skill set that we anticipate being funded for that. That's a mid-year hire, so it's projected to occur in July of 2014, and they would be taking a lead role in developing the parks plan. And then there was a specific park that you had in mind that you talked about, which was Hillside Park. And so the Parks Department is anticipating doing like a 3-phase effort for community outreach to look at Hillside Park for this upcoming year. And so that effort would probably be led by the Deputy Recreation Director at that time. The Green Infrastructure Plan, this is really a multi-department effort led by the Office of Sustainability. And we'd have connections with the bike ped plan that they're supposed to finish by the end of the year. And then there are also some efforts by Public Works Engineering and Parks and Rec on the development and connection of parks throughout the, throughout the whole community. The Healthy Community Strategy and the Neighborhood Engagement Plan, we anticipate that's going to be a full effort being led by the Human and Social Sustainability Manager. It's that Human Services Manager. We've got kind of a variety of titles throughout the budget. It's the same position. But that person starts in July of 2014. The other piece is there are multiple departments that are engaged with this. So if you look at the Neighborhood Engagement Plan, for example, there's a significant effort being led by the Communications Division and the Office of Sustainability. A lot of that is being done on social media. You'll be getting a report on that later this year. But also, we would look at building upon existing building blocks that the city has for neighborhood engagement. So the police department's community engagement, community block watch strategy, the Map Your Neighborhood effort, some of the work that Brenda Bramwell does with the CERT team. So those are all a variety of different ways that we engage with the community. And so the real focus is going to be with communications and the new Human and Social Sustainability Manager, kind of take that next step up and enhance some additional building blocks related to that.
So looking at that goal and hiring a human and
Social
social
Sustainability Manager.
sustainability manager,
That's probably why you shortened it.
you know, it seems like there's a lot of work that needs to begin early on, and without the human and social sustainability manager, they come on mid-year, that effort might already be underway and moving in a direction that if that person was on board would be more helpful to ensure that that goal is met in 2014. Just an observation.
I think that's a fair observation. You know, we had a lot of discussion about the timing of that hire because we were looking at actually hiring someone here towards the end of this year. And then when that didn't work out, we ended up taking another look at when that would be filled. Next year is another grant cycle. So, you know, in discussions with the Human Services Commission, starting that position a little earlier in the year would be an advantage to them. Most of that work is being done by Lisa out of our office right now, the administrative work. And then we would have the Office of Sustainability really take more of a lead role. But we had to weigh it against the total needs in the budget, and so we ended up coming up in the presentation with a July start date. But certainly we've got opportunities if council decides in your deliberations to make a change to do that.
Well, could you flag that sort of as a question so we don't lose track of it?
Okay.
Tola?
Yeah, I think more broadly, I guess what I'd like to know as we go to move forward with the budget is specifically which goals are the intention of which 2014 goals are the intention of the administration to complete in 2014, what the estimated cost of completion is, and how that compares against $90,000. I guess I'm concerned that I hear we're going to spend $90,000, and I'm not hearing that we're spending $90,000 because we believe all the goals that can be accomplished in 2014 add up to $90,000. So I'd like to hear more about that before deliberations are over.
Sure. So there is, as I was saying, some of this is being led by staff. So if you take the Human Social Sustainability Manager, that's actually $60,000 that's in the budget for that. The last one, the feasibility study of the Issaquah City Campus, we had an estimate of $55,000. That $55,000 is actually in the budget for next year. So the 90, and maybe I wasn't real clear when I said that at the beginning. There's some of these that I think we're really going to have to look at the work plan for this upcoming year, and then balance these against the metrics that you've put on in terms of what's most important to fund. These are hierarchical orders. So if the ED department comes back and says, your marketing packet's going to cost you $80,000 next year, well, it's fourth on the list, and if some of these other ones take a higher priority, and we get those kind of that, a little more detail on that, we're going to have to dial back what the actual work ends up being, so.
I asked because the administration was kind enough to provide estimates of these costs when we put together our goals. So it probably should not come as a surprise that what these things cost.
Oh, I don't think we were surprised. I think we only can afford a certain amount of the work that was projected. And I think, but we can certainly provide that original list if you'd like to see what was provided to the council.
No, I think what I'd like to see is what the administration thinks it can accomplish in 2014 and what those items would cost.
Okay.
And I'll second what he said, because I don't understand how the 90,000 is broken up amongst these items when, you've pointed to the professional marketing material. That obviously will cost something. But a lot of these others are just within departments as staff time or could be allocated within those departments. But, I don't recall these being hierarchical. I don't recall when the goals were set that happened. We ran out of chits or dots or whatever we used last year, and then we had a final round of voting, which is where some of them came in. But I don't think we ever actually prioritized that literally number one, developing a capital and operations plan was the most important goal in 2014. I think we just made a list of 11 goals.
So when I say that, and you can help give me some guidance on that, we went with what had the most votes. So number one had 6 votes, and then it went down from there. And so the last 4 actually didn't make the first list. I think you ended up re-voting because it was 3-3.
But as to the ones that all got the same number of votes, it's not like if 8 and 9 got the same number of votes, you can't say 8 should be prioritized financially over 9.
No, I think they're just, some of these are tied, so
Right.
whenever you do a tie, they're about equivalent. Yeah.
I think it's fairly clear what the council's looking for. I think Tola summarized it quite well in
Okay.
his last comment, and I think I heard a +1 from Josh. Okay,
That's all I had on that.
So we'll be switching over to Development Services for their presentation.
before we do that, are there any other questions on the goal? Stacy?
I'm just moving over there. I think there's some people.
So, one of the things we had for 2013 was the Rainier Trail.
Yes.
The final plan was have Rainier Trail, and it says status ongoing. I talked about the Issaquah Community Network and the goals, and I believe that there would be a city match for that, the work they're talking about doing.
For the $125,000 grant
Yes.
they received. So there is no city match. It's all from, thank you. It's,
Yeah,
so there's,
Time Services.
yeah, there's staff support being provided for that.
okay.
I also, Katie from the Recreation Department is kind of chairing up that effort too, so.
So, I guess my question is, I'm not sure that I've seen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure that I've seen what we've done, in pursuit of that goal that we had in 2013. And I'm wondering what the plan is, to achieve that goal. And then why wouldn't that be elevated over another goal? The one that comes to mind is the feasibility study on campus, plus city campus. Even if we did that, like, I'm not sure really with the money to build a new campus. So my general question is, what have we done to achieve the 2013 goal of enhancing the trail?
And that is, I think that's goal number 4, 2013, on page 223.
Yes.
So, the police department's going to be doing a presentation shortly, and I don't know how much we can talk about what the police department's efforts are in that area or not. So I'm going to punt that question to them when they come up here, and they may be able to answer that a little more specifically. But we do have an ongoing multi-department departmental effort there to focus on the Rainier Trail.
Given that we just had some significant public comment raises them. Is there, and then on number 3 on that same page, on the public lands inventory, it says the inventory is complete. I'm not sure who's seen that.
You're right. Matter of fact, I put a note on here that they need to get that reported out to committee, to you. So it has to come to council and get reviewed. Services committee, so that should be done in the fourth quarter of this year.
Paul? Oh,
Yeah, I just wanted to, follow up Stacy's question and make sure I understood this. So some goals take more than one calendar year to accomplish. They get started late in a year and they spill over into the other. So we initiated we identified some for 2014, and they're going to get started, some in 2014. In the meantime, we have some that initiated in 2013 and they're still running into 2014. So really, and so this is kind of what I heard in the question. I just want to make sure I understand that, because I think it's a good point in that we present them as, here's the 2014 goals, but there's really some legacy council goals that really need, if we're going to look at these in priority order, I don't think hierarchical is the right word. I think you mean like kind of a priority order. Then it would be good, I think, to see the incomplete ones from previous years in that same list.
You're absolutely right. And I think when council does their retreat, that's where you kind of start, is we look at those 2013 goals and where they are, and you make a decision whether you want to carry those forward, or if the work kind of gets done at the end of that year. If I recall, that does get done on a regular basis. It didn't. I thought it did, but okay.
so I would actually suggest that in the first quarter, when we get the detailed work plans that you referenced before, you include in that those 2013 goals that were completed and those that are still in process, so we can continue to track those throughout the year on our quarterly reports.
Okay.
Yes, one of the things I was going to do was follow up on Councilmember Goodwin's question, also with regards to the funding of the community, the feasibility of a campus. One of the things is I often explain, and it's not necessarily here, but in some cases, our individual funds, we can be both what I call rich and poor. And the rich or the poor depends on the funding and the revenue source available. So sometimes it's harder to find money available for operations, but in this case, because it is something new, it is of a capital nature, we have mitigation money that we have been provided for general services that then allow us to do the study. But that can only be used on a capital improvement. So over here you might have something where you need to fix something. That has to be a different source of revenue, and you can't use this restricted revenue. So one of the opportunities when we had this goal was looking at the available revenue to fund it. Mitigation money was available, so that one was a lot easier versus a study that is a study for its own sake, or like a tourism plan or a marketing plan. Those are considered operational, so we have to look to different sources of revenue to fund that. Does that make sense?
Yes. But building a new city campus is not my priority, but I'm not sure that that's where the citizens think we ought to be spending millions of dollars, where that may come from.
So that's,
That's a different, but if you're gonna spend money on a study, then if you don't utilize that study right away, then it becomes outdated.
Okay, are there other questions or comments on that topic? Then moving to developmental services.
Great, thank you. Glad to be here. I'm John Minato, Director of Development Services. Christopher Wright's our Project Oversight Manager, and Dave Favors our Deputy Director. So what we're going to present tonight is a overview of the changes and how Development Services has evolved over the past couple of years. to give you an idea of the different things that we've been able to achieve during our transition. So we'll start with 2011. There were 4 primary departments involved with reviewing development permits. You can see there's building, MDRT, PWE engineering, and planning. So development service review at that time was managed independently under 4 departments who coordinated review and inspections together with varying independent department priorities and work plans that were not always in alignment. And supporting the permit process at that time, then we had PWE had 3 staff, MDRT 3 staff plus consultants, planning had 12 staff, building 13 for a total of 31. Then the November 2011 Moss-Adams report provided an assessment of the effectiveness of development review departments, and the study identified a need for improved organizational management, alignment of business practices between departments, and better coordination and formality in project management. So we began the transition to our reorganization. During the transition to development services, a number of staffing changes occurred, which resulted in an overall reduction of 12 positions. So we went from 31 to 19, and you can see the differences approximately with the, I guess we can call them purple smiley faces, in the various department circles there. The consolidations of departments resulted in a reorganization and formation of Development Services Department that was presented at the March 27 Council of the Whole meeting, and today we have a staff of 24. So the question we're here to answer is, how are we doing with the goals and challenges that we set out to achieve? So first, let's look at permitting activity over the last 4 years. The graph shows that while applications have remained somewhat constant in the 700 to 800 range of permit applications, there is a definite increase in permitting following our reorganization in 2012, 2013. For a new department, we found that undergoing reorganization with less staff, this meant we had to quickly figure out ways to become more efficient. And realistically, as we went through that process, we realized more and more that it takes quite a bit of time to reorganize and build new processes. And so we'll get into now, how do we go about doing these changes, and how do we go about getting the work done? So as a city, the reorganization involved much more than just DSD. We needed to create alignment with our existing departments and our new partners in economic development, shared services, and Office of Sustainability. We embraced a new cultural change involving high-performance organization and lean. So at this time, I think I'm going to turn this over to Christopher Wright, our project oversight manager, who will talk about some of those strategies for permitting efficiencies and streamlining.
Thank you, John. So my new position that was created as a result of the reorganization is primarily to oversee the permit process, not just manage the permit center, but work closely with the planners, the engineers, the plans examiners, the other department reviewers, and the applicants to make sure that the permit process runs smoothly. Also, a significant part of my job is to keep everyone informed about what projects we're working on and what projects are on the horizon. For that, we've created the active project list that's on the city's website, which is a significant improvement over what used to be out there. And then internally, we have a project list as well that includes not just the projects we're working on, but also potential projects and applications that are not in yet, but that we're just starting to talk about. As it's turned out, and which I think is great, because I'm involved with all of the city departments at some level or another, and because my position is so process-oriented, I've been in an ideal position to demonstrate, encourage, and incorporate the principles of high-performance organization, and especially lean, into our processes in our new organization.
Christopher, we've used the term lean a number of times, and everyone around this table probably knows what lean is, but those watching on TV might not be familiar with that term. So what does lean stand for?
The letters, lean. Charlie, do you know what that is?
I couldn't give you the exact acronym, but we've been doing a lot of work with the high-performance organization model, and there are a number of tools within that model that you can use to improve your organization's culture as well as your systems. And so we're using lean a lot. You'll see for Kaizen events in the presentation. For example, for process improvement, where we take sometimes several days, we step back from the normal process and basically engineer it, lay it out, and then re-engineer it, and then rebuild it.
So it's a process that looks at how we're currently doing something, gets all the players together, and then figures out whether we're doing it the most efficient way, and is there a better way of doing it, and if there's a better way, trying to design that better way and then implement it into the organization.
Absolutely. On the organizational level, that's 100% correct. And then on the individual level, there's also application of lean. We're just starting to move into that area at the individual level and in the smaller groups in the organization as well.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, and then that leads into the next part of my presentation, which is talking about a couple of the best examples of utilizing lean within our department and citywide would be the fact that the DSD hosted 2 different Kaizen events to evaluate processes. And Kaizen events really are basically process evaluation workshops where we do just what you said. You lay out the existing process, you look at where which steps have value added, you take away the ones that don't, and then you're left with just the essential important parts of the process. And then we took it a step further and looked at those value-added steps and looked at how we can make those even better. So those were 2 different week-long workshops that we had. The first one was to evaluate our land use permit process, and that was in early June. And the second was to evaluate our construction permit process, which was just last month. And through those workshops, which we are collaborating with department reviewers from each of the different departments, we were able to merge the old MDRT process, for example, with the valley floor process, and make our new, make the permit review process much more streamlined and more efficient. And once all of the protocols and submittal requirements and support documentation is all done and in place, the overall permit review times could be reduced by as much as 50%. And incorporating also electronic plan review is another example of once it's completely up and running and we're all completely up to speed on it, will also have a significant impact on the efficiency of the permit process. We're really just starting to fully realize the benefits of the reorganization and the new processes that have been created as a result. Just to give you another example, having all of the planners and engineers and plans examiners and structural engineer and environmental planner and Eastside Fire and Rescue is in our office 2 days a week. Having everybody all together is huge. Like I said, we're just starting to see the benefits of that, and it has clearly eliminated, reduced the silos that used to exist that just created a lot of inefficiencies. We're really proud of the new processes that we've created, and we look forward to continuing to refine them and have them fully implemented next year. We're also hoping to do further similar, hopefully smaller evaluations of other processes next year, including inspections, special events permits, business licenses, and new business orientation. So finally, I'll just say, if you guys have any questions at all about our new permit processes, or if you want to know more about how those Kaizen events work, just let me know, because I'd love to talk to you about them. Thank you.
One of the things I'll say relative to the lean programs that we were running, those were especially significant because the site development permit and the construction permit, they are really the backbone of the permit types that we most often, a lot of projects are going to touch those permits itself. So to the point where we can actually look at those and study the efficiencies that we're making in this program, I think is going to benefit a lot of the projects as we go on from here and just refine and kind of define how that process works. So we're going to be able to use those processes in pretty much everything else that we do relative to permitting and apply a lot of those same concepts to that. So that's one of the reasons why we did choose those. But it's been a huge undertaking, and thanks to the departments for supporting us in that.
I think, too, that, you just didn't go through this process and then walk away and say it's done. I mean, the greatest example is the Gilman Square development that's working it through. You're forcing that development through the new process that you've developed and making, tweaks and adjustments, I think. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, what we have found is the best way to kind of roll this out is in pieces. It's not a case where we could just flip a switch and, okay, now, all of a sudden we're doing the new process, because there's so many projects that are at various stages. And so really the way it's playing out is we're taking applications as they come in and starting to initiate the new processes, and the potential redevelopment of the Gilman Square is one of the first best ones, where we started that early collaboration phase that really came to a forefront in the Kaizen event. That emphasis put on early meetings with the applicants, and so yeah, it will better define and create the supporting documentation for projects as they move through. So yeah, establishing the process, that was the first step, but now all of that background support needs to be created as we move projects through.
How will we know we're doing better? Do we have metrics on the old system, and we've developed metrics that show us how we're doing under the new processes and systems, and will that be one of the kinds of things that's included in the annual report where we evaluate our performance?
Yeah, I mean, to give you an idea of timing, what I would guess is it'll be a year maybe before everything is complete, all of the pieces are completely defined and tried, and all of the support documentation is in place, and we've been doing it for a while. And then it may be, a year beyond that before there's enough permits that have been completely through the process, that have gone, through the complete new process all the way. It may be another year beyond that before we can really go back, have enough data to compare that to what happened in, say, 2012 or prior. So we'll be able to do that. It's just going to take a while before something can really be held up as having gone completely through the new process.
I think, as Council Member Butler mentioned, we did identify some process, cycle times.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we identified some new potential metrics in terms of, so you've got a benchmark at least of what the old system was and what you think, and just, you want to touch on one here? Like, do you remember?
Well, I mean, that both of them, as I mentioned.
Well, I tell you what, you can, we don't need to get into a detailed discussion, but you could just document that in a little fact sheet or something like that, so that the council has a feel or appreciation for how we're doing. Josh?
Oh, thanks. No hurry. I do have a budgetary question related to permits. Page 434 of the budget talks about, and I hope I'm close enough to this thing, I'm not used to this. Page 434 of the budget talks about the revenue comparison for 2014, and then in the same category, the expenditure comparison for building permits and plan reviews. And I noticed that the expenditure revenue delta is a lot bigger than previous years. In fact, in 2012, it was reversed. So I'm trying to figure out, you know, there's a lot of talk about the lean performance and high performing, yet the expenditures are trending in a different direction. And it would seem to me to be the reverse under these sort of lean strategies that, you know, we'd be bringing those expenditures down. Is this just sort of a temporary uptick, or are we just not expecting a lot of revenue? Where is that causing that differentiation there?
I think I can answer part of that question and look to Diane to supplement, but that would be, one, in the prior years, we were 4 different departments, so it was really hard to categorize where all the staffing efficiencies existed, but we are combined into DSD now, as I mentioned, with 24, but we're also moving to a consultant. We moved to a consultant-based model for engineering services, so I think the expenditure side is reflecting the costs that we're paying out for engineering services that may not have been at that level before.
If that's increasing the expense revenue delta, is that a good idea? Is it better to, you know, is it more efficient to do the work in-house if the consultants are what's causing us to have expenditures that are higher than the projected revenue?
Well, I think if you look at 2013 budget versus 2014 budget, the department expenses are actually going down by $500,000. And so a big part of that is the charges and services. So those are going from 1.3 to $597,000. Now the challenge on the revenues is what we're actually charging, you know, to recover our costs. A big part of that before was the MDRT, and so they recovered. It was time and materials, and they recovered 100% of their costs under the village, you know, the village agreements. Those things are pretty much wrapping up, and so then the question is how all the other permit work gets done. And there has been, you know, decision in the past to have the general fund pick up more of those expenses, and I think Land and Shore has been really kicking around, you know, what the approximate fee ought to be for recovering those costs.
And I wasn't looking at the charges and services under planning. I was looking strictly at a one-to-one permit revenue, permit expenditure, which is the graph here, but.
So I had the same question, but I'll come about it a little bit differently. And it is that chart that really illustrates it really well on page 4-35. And when I looked at that, I wondered to myself, especially looking at the 2014 projection, I wondered if that's really fair to do a revenue to expenditure comparison, because first of all, I didn't know that the department had some objective to be full cost recovery. In other words, so that was one question. I didn't see it anywhere in the charter. And then also, is measuring the revenue for permits really measuring the effectiveness of that organization? And I question of whether or not it did. So those questions came to mind when I looked at that chart.
And so,
Diane wants to answer.
oh. So Bob said that we've been looking at what we charge and how much the general fund has been subsidizing that, and it's been before Land and Shore 3 different times, and that will be the topic of a council work session in November where we will get into the nuts and bolts of that. So that's just a status or update of where that effort and that agenda bill is. And so, Diane, do you have something to add?
Well, I hope it's something of value. One of the things, as I've been spending a lot of time with John over the last couple of months trying to really understand his operations, one of the things that has become apparent is because of what our fee structure is, a lot of times what happens is both on permitting and the development side, they pay their fees up front. But in some cases, as Christopher said, the actual expenditures doesn't occur until sometime down the road. So trying to really, you almost need, instead of doing a one-year snapshot, you really need to begin developing a database that's sort of a rolling information database, because of, we might get $2 million today, but we're going to be spending it over the next 2 to 3 years. And so John and I have been having a lot of conversations about, help me understand, so that when we're doing budget and reporting, we have a better sense of, this should be in reserve, but this part of the dollars we're really spending.
I think I've also heard of it referred to as project accounting.
Yes.
Ola?
When we get to that full council session, I'll be interested to understand. I look at this and I go, gosh, the last couple of years, expenditures and revenues were pretty close. So some of the fees that some of the fee increases we've been looking at are a lot more than the 1% that these numbers are off. So I'll save that for that full council discussion of those fees. But this adds confusion for me.
Okay. Stacy?
I have a more general question when talking about the new organizational structure to show.
Quit turning it off.
We show fewer people, but I don't see sort of a cost accounting here. So are we saving money through the reorganization? And can we get some kind of a summary report about that?
Yep, we can do that for you.
Thanks.
Okay, seeing no more questions. John, are you through?
No, not yet.
Well,
A few more examples.
Roll them.
Okay. So talking about, we talked a little bit about the volume and permit activity that we've been doing, and we are seeing a rise in the permitting activity. Adding to that, I guess I would say that we continue to do work on other projects as well that benefit our community. And I'm just going to go through a few of those that I think highlight what that is. What you're seeing on the screen there is a lot of different projects, but kind of to highlight on that, some of the development agreements that we've been working on are very beneficial to the city, but it does take a lot of staff time to actually sit down and work through those, both through the urban village councils as well as going through our council committees itself. The annexation for Klahani, the marijuana use laws, Christopher had mentioned the HPO and Kaizen Lean implementation workshops that we did. Huge amount of staff time investment in that. We'll be working on strategic planning for the new traffic currency. Updating our impact fees has been a significant project. E-plan implementation, that's when I came before council several years ago to start charging 1.3% tax or fee for that to help pay for that program. So with the east side cities, that's now been programmed, and we have that up and running. And completion of the Grand Ridge Plaza by the year's end is a very large one for us for this year. That's 320,000 square feet of quality retail projects. And so kind of give you a sneak peek into next year as well, because that gives you an idea of where we're rolling with projects. Highlight a few. We've got probably over 1,000 new residential units that we'll be permitting and inspecting in construction development over the next year. We'll be working on a 7-year comp plan update. That's a very large project. Development continued of our traffic concurrency program, and the potential Microsoft development agreement. That'll be another large project that we'll be moving forward with. So I wanted to now just talk about, I guess, just some lessons that we've learned from our process over the years, and I'll go over this fairly quickly. But we used the Grand Ridge Plaza project as an in-house pilot program to implement our new one-stop shopping for the department. One goal of this program was to issue permits on the customer's specified target date, along with issuing certificate of occupancies on those target dates. So considering a project as large as Grand Ridge Plaza, we're able to hit our target mark 85% of the time. So that would be a measure of how well are we doing. How do we know we're doing well with that? That's one example where we know an applicant gave us a goal to hit for their grand opening targets, and we're able to hit that 85% of the time. So what we learned from that there is a definite customer value in having reviewers under one department operating towards the same goal and providing probably one of the more important things, a predictable development schedule. And so finally, kind of continuing on with lessons learned, we approached Regency with a full-time on-site inspection program. So this is kind of something that we did before that we know that works, that adds a lot of value. And we went to Regency and we came up to them with a program to fast-track their construction schedule. And by fast-track, I don't mean skipping things that we should be looking at, but fast-tracking it in the sense of giving them more quality inspections within a day, within a 24-hour period. And so the program was a major contributor to timely and on-schedule opening of their businesses, and they're still benefiting from it today as well as the city. They have grand openings that they're hitting their mark on, and so we see that as really a value-driven process there. And as we look forward, the important lesson that we know that staff is committed to providing a high level of service for our customers. They've remained focused, dedicated, and innovative throughout the process without really missing much along the way. The projects that I've touched on demonstrates, in my opinion, that we are on the right path, that we're aligned to get this right, and we do ask for more patience, however, as we do work through the rest of the year and the upcoming year and putting our projects in process and just working through that. So thank you to our staff and thank you to you.
Any other follow-on questions from DSD? Great, well, keep up the good work. And so now, I think we're moving to the Police Department and Chief Paul Ayers. Scott, are you coming up also?
I got it.
You've got his back.
I can do it.
Chief, good evening.
Good evening. How are you?
We're doing great because this is the favorite part of the year for the Issaquah City Council.
Wow.
When we look forward to the next year.
Okay. Well, I'm excited for you then that I get that opportunity to talk about it. Well, first thing I'd like to talk about, the Issaquah Police Department did have a very good year this year, and we're hoping that we finish it out the same way. But there's many reasons for that, and some of it has to do with our employees that we have. But the second part of it is the support we get from the mayor's office and also from the city administrator and certainly from the city council. We know we're a large part of the budget. We know we are expensive when you look at all the issues, but we do appreciate the support that we receive. And also our support from our citizens that are very supportive of law enforcement in our community and support us whenever we need it. So it's a real plus to us to be able to provide the service that we do provide. We haven't really worked out how to make this work. So. I just wanted to talk briefly about what we accomplished in 2013. It was a busy year. One of our major projects we were working on and have been working on for a couple of years is K-CERT. K-CERT is East Side cities working together to conduct administrative investigations into use of force issues or deaths in custody, whether it's in our city or many of the other cities. We do have an officer assigned to that, to K-CERT. And I hope in 2011, we had to use King County to come in and do an investigation. Now we would call in K-CERT. And I hope we don't have to use it in the future, but if we do, it is there. And if other cities on the east side need it, we'll be providing them assistance also. A capital project we had last year that we purchased this year was the Celebrite, which is a forensic tool to be able to get into cell phones and other electronic devices. We have our officers trained, and they are using it. That has just kind of went online for us, so we're now trying to get rid of the backlog of all the phones we've been saving, getting our people to where they are currently. Automatic license plate reader has been installed and is out on the street. It has been working for a couple weeks. We do have some little problems which IT is working on with us to make it work, but you will see it out and about. And if you notice one of our Tahoes, there's 4 small cameras on the roof. They're very small, and they have. We hope that it produces some results that we're looking for. That comes that wanted people or vehicles that are stolen are wanted. All of our Spillman modules, except for the automatic vehicle locators, are up and running. A 911 center generator transfer switch. This was, as you know, the building, the police department and city hall has a very large generator that runs a complete building. We wanted some redundancy in our communication center, and this switch allows us to bring in a portable generator in case we do have a problem with our large generator. I thought it would just be a device that we, every 2 years or so, dusted off because we wouldn't have to use it. But it turned out this year we've had to use it twice already due to some issues with Puget Sound energy, some fuel issues, some mechanical issues. We did lose our main generator, and we went to the portable. We were able to just plug it in, and we were back. We could not operate certainly the whole building, but our dispatch center was up and running because we had that transfer switch in. And this was also paid for. We paid for it initially, but King County reimbursed us funding.
Backing up a little bit, Chief, to the automatic license plate
Yes.
recognition. That was, my memory sort of tells me that was a relatively low-cost investment for that capability, around 16,000 or?
25,000. It was
25,000.
approximately 23, 24 was exact. We had 25 budgeted
Okay.
for it, and I believe we used all of it to get it installed.
And so, is one of those enough, or are you waiting to get that fully up and operational to evaluate that? Are there any thoughts on whether more than one would be a requirement for us?
We certainly want to see the kind of use we get out of it and the results. If it produces some results that we expect to see, then we will eventually maybe be coming back. We probably want to give it about 6 months to a year to see what the results are, to see how that will work in the future.
Great.
Several, maybe even up to a decade ago, the police department had a Citizens Academy. We started the Citizens Academy up again this year. We have about 22 Issaquah, either citizens or people that work in Issaquah that are attending the academy on Wednesday night, and we're about halfway through the academy for 10 sessions. And so far, it seems like they're really enjoying it, and I know our officers are enjoying being able to talk about our department to the group. We are involved in an IRS financial crimes task force. IRS pays the overtime rate of one of our officers, so it does not take that officer away from his normal duties, but on his days off, he works with the IRS. He has conducted some federal criminal investigations. There has been some drug seizures, some money seizures, and those people are in the middle of the federal system right now, and we'll see how that shakes out and what the disposition of those cases are. A couple months ago, the domestic violence ordinance went into effect. As you know, the city council voted on it, and it did pass. And sorry to tell you that in the short time it's been in effect, we've arrested several people on domestic violence, but we have arrested 3 people with the enhanced charge of having a domestic violence in front of a person under 16 years of age. All 3 of those cases are still in the court system, so we'll see how that does come out. Of course, we're still working on the King County PSAP consolidation study. The initial study is done, and I believe it has been provided to you. Now the next phase has been a group getting together to talk about the consolidation study and to see what that really means now that the study's done. And Bob is representing the city, and Commander Stan Conrad is representing the police department. I believe they've had one meeting to get it started, and it's going to be another long process to see how they're going to make that work. We're also meeting with Redmond and Bothell later this week. We have continually had conversations with them about some positions that we're going to take as we move further into this process. We certainly believe consolidation has some merits, but it's mostly consolidation of equipment versus shutting down a center, opening up a new center that none of us can afford to get up and running. And in the last couple of years, both at the retreats and at budget time, I have talked about our workload and our manpower, particularly out in the street in the patrol division. So after our work study or their budget retreat last year, we did start a workload analysis, and there's some slides later on where I'll talk about that and what it means. Just to start, so you get an understanding of the police department, you can see the number of people assigned to the commission staff, which is patrol, traffic, and school resource officer, our detectives, command staff, which consists of myself as a police chief, a deputy chief, and then 2 commanders. Our E911 supervisor and our communication staff, our E911 IT and GIS analyst. Tom is also is very knowledgeable as Spillman. He works for Spillman on the side, and so we get a lot of great resources out of him. And the nice thing about that is King County 911 pays 100% of his salary and benefits for him to do E911 GIS work for King County, along with however we can use him. Our executive staff, and of course our jail manager and our corrections. This represents a 1.5 increase in our personnel. We were 62. This is reinstating a records position, which was 2008 when we lost that position. Kind of the start of that position was froze. We had somebody leave and it was vacant, so it was frozen. And then after Lori Grigg retired from the department, we did some reorganization, and we have a part-time person that is going to be, we did an internal promotion, and so we have and that used to be a full-time position, and we made some changes, and now that's a part-time position, and that person starts with us on Thursday.
So other than that position, are all of your other positions filled at this time?
They are not. And I got some confusing slide and to talk about. So the consolidation study, this is just quickly showing our numbers since 2008. We've just had a steady increase in 911 calls. Part of the consolidation study, which really was a concern to us, King County looks at 911 calls as a metric of how busy you are. Majority of our cell phone calls go to different centers, whether it, WSP, Dispatch Center, Norcom, or King County, and then in turn those calls are relayed or sent to the proper agency. A lot of times we receive these calls on our business lines, and so we have been trying to work real hard to make sure that WSP, if they receive a cell phone 911 call, they get a tick mark on the graph to show that they got a 911 call. When they transfer it to us, we should also get it, but a lot of times we do not because it comes in on our business line. You're doing a great job. The workload analysis that we performed was performed on the patrol division, and it talks about 22 uniform officers. They're assigned in 4 districts within the city. They're work 12-hour shifts. And I just highlighted it to talk a little bit about authorized strength. Currently, And I would use this used to be highlighted on the one but on the sergeant's position on the right-hand side is the position of Kevin Nash. As you know, Kevin just retired after 23 years of service. And so we have 22 people assigned to patrol, and that's our authorized strength that we work with. In 2014, we want to have do some internal discussion, but also take a discussion to the mayor's office and the city administrator, and eventually to the city council. One issue we have is Kevin leaves. It just so happened he left unexpectedly. He knew he was going to retire. We knew he was going to retire eventually, but we just weren't expecting it to happen this year. So when he leaves, due to both the civil service rules, the RCW involving backgrounds on police officers, training, we won't have, whether we can replay, we have to do some internal promotions. We're in the process of doing that. But we won't have an officer to fill that down at the officer level for several months. That's just the process that we work under. And what we'd like to have is some kind of discussion which in turns allows us to have a little bit more authorized strength, so when we do have someone like Kevin leave, that in turn we can have a person already going versus having these up and down. We have a very low turnover in the police department, but if we lose one person in dispatch, it's going to take us several months before that we have the new person up and running, even if they're experienced. So we're just trying to figure out a way to make that work. As Kevin leaves, he has some cash out coming from the city from vacation, comp time, and that comes out of our salary lines. And we've have had some discussions about how we can make that work so we don't have that downtime and we end up paying overtime, those type of things. So that'll be happening next year. Also, this corporal position that I just highlighted is Corporal Bill Gerald was activated early this year by the Air Force, and he is overseas. In July of this year, we were authorized a new position. We, working with the mayor's office and Bob, we were able to get that position hired before Bob left. Before Bill Gerald left. So we're not, until Bill Gerald comes back, we have not recognized any savings, I guess. And we received no benefit from having the new officer, which was started early, just because we had to fill a position. So those are things that we're trying to work on, and we will be working on in 2014, and trying to have a discussion and eventually bring it to the council to talk about how we're going to work that out. I mean, all departments have the same issues. Some of them have some funding models that allows us to pay Kevin, for example, and not affect our bottom line and have some people up and running. As Fred, your question was, will we have that by July 1st? The way the budget's set up, we don't hire them until July 1st.
And that, I just want to echo what you said. It is a challenge because there's always attrition in the police department. I can't remember the last time you had full staffing, and that challenge is always you've got an authorized level, and it takes 6 months to replace someone. So what I've seen some cities do in the past is you determine what your anticipated force level would be, and you authorize a position or so above that, and then you put in some extra money. It's not like a full staffing, but it may be a quarter's worth of salary, because what you're trying to do is hit the straight line. So there may be some months where you're slightly over, some months where you're slightly above, but your what you've actually budgeted, you hit that year end. So I think the chief raises a good point here. It's a challenge to hit that force level that we want to achieve.
So it seems like there's two questions. There's how do you fund it, but then how do you staff? How do you get to full strength? And it sounds like what you're saying, there isn't really a good solution for how do you stay at full strength with these every so often things that come up, even though we might come up with a mechanism to handle the funding side of it.
Yeah, so if the chief says our staffing should be 22, and you really want 22, you actually almost need to authorize 24 or 23.5. And what you end up doing, because there is a certain amount of attrition every year, and then you have to allocate a certain amount of money in there that you get that balance over that certain period of time. Now, he knows that the max is 22, and that's what that goes into level service expectation, but it is a constant challenge, particularly with the police department, that you see it the most.
Thank you. Our workload analysis did show that, 74% of our calls for service occur between the hours of 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. That really wasn't a surprise to us, but we were looking at calls differently in the past, and now we look at them in this manner. And in the first half of 2013, we have seen a 10% in our calls for service. So we know our calls for service is going up, and there is a graph we'll talk about a little later on, and we're seeing some great leaps up in the Highlands, and we're not surprised. That's what we expected as everything started to build out, or was in the process of build out. And we're seeing some of those call loads increases up in the Highlands. And one thing that's never been counted in the past, and there's just so many different ways to count how what metric do you want to use to count calls for service, those type of things. What we started looking at a couple of years ago is, and I know I used the example with you before, but I'll use it again. If we give a person finds a wallet in the street and brings it up to a police officer, the police officer takes it, handles it, and returns it to its owner, that goes down in our call load as one call. In September 2011, when we had a shooting, we had 7 of our officers involved in that incident that day, our detectives, the court hearing, all the issues that went on with that went down as one call. So what we always want to remember is that 35% of our calls takes a minimum of 2 officers, and depending on the severity of the call, maybe up to all of our staff. And so when we just look at calls for service, that has always kind of been a problem of how do we also include the other officer that's not over here working. They're together doing whatever it is. And we have so many calls that, our whole squad is on. Everyone is on that call. And we eventually, those things cost us, one way or the other. Part of our workload analysis is that we started this year comes from the International City Managers Association. And a workload analysis is made up of many parts. And one of the parts of the analysis is called the Rule of 60, which examines workload and discretionary time of patrol officers. ICMA suggests that no more than 60% available patrol officer time is spent responding to service demands of a community. The remaining 40% of the time is the discretionary time for officers to be available to address community problems and provide preventive patrol. The ratio of dedicated time compared to discretionary time is referred to as the saturation index, or SI. ICMA contention is that patrol staff are properly deployed when the SI is in the 60% range. A SI greater than 60% indicates that the patrol manpower is largely reactive and not proactive. As you know, we have always looked at and really figured that our proactive time was probably our most important time. That's the most time we wanted. But as you know, we've been working with our officer time goals as being 33 1/3 of an officer's time is dedicated to preventive patrol. 33% of the time is directed for calls of service. And 33% of the time is directed to administrative duties. The ICMA study suggests there is a better way to look at the officer's time. So, with the understanding that this is the 60% line that they're talking about, these are the 4 districts that we represent on the bottom of the graphs, which represents the parts of the city, with Zone 1 being the downtown area, Zone 3, Gilman area, 4, the Highlands, and Zone 6 is north of I-90. As you look at the calls for service in Zone 1, and the colors have changed on me here, so As you can see, this in our downtown district and let's just say 60% is a good number to have. The downtown district from 10 o'clock in the morning until we're almost to midnight, that call, we don't have any preventive time. We have no time to go to meet with our businesses, to be down on a Rainier Trail, unless we assign those as calls. We just have no way of fitting those into the schedule. On the other hand, when we look at the Highlands, we're way down here, so if Highlands didn't have a build-out and it was a status quo, then we would want to look at doing some movement here of the officers or the districts. But we're seeing, because very, very few of the time, in fact, the Highlands is exactly kind of where it should be. That's where we want to have it. But we don't have that ability because the other ones are higher, and in turn, this one is starting to creep up as time goes on. So we're very conscious of what our time that the officer's spending out there. So just remember that line of 60%. You'll probably hear it in the future.
So when you're talking about the 60% of the time spent, one call generally generates a lot of paperwork for an officer?
It depends.
Okay.
Yes. They write some reports, they're so small from their car. Some reports are very long. An arrest, particular domestic violence, DUI, those are very time consuming. That officer may be tied up. Well, we do talk about it. Sometimes the person is out of jail before the officer's done with his paperwork. So it really depends. We haven't set an average, just because we spend so much time on some and so little on others.
So would you want that paperwork time to be part of that 60%?
Sure. No, you'd want it to be the 40%.
Okay.
I'm sorry. You want it to be this area in
Okay.
here. This should be responding to calls,
Okay.
doing whatever you do, going to calls, preparing for calls. When it gets up into this number, all that officer is just preparing for is to go to another call. I'm not going to go down and walk the Rainier Trail because I know I have another call coming, for example. That's how we're looking at it right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And so overall, putting all the districts together, you can see how we are, certainly in the middle of the night, but we can't go contact a lot of businesses at this time to talk to them about safety. We are down on the trails at this time, looking for, the campers or the calls for service, drunk drivers, all these things. But as we get into the daytime hours, we're extremely high when it comes to, we just don't have the ability to do that. I'll have you stay there for just a minute, that's okay. Because I want to caution you that this is not an absolute. We have just kind of started the looking into the SI, and you don't want to interpret it too narrow. We can go high at certain hours, and we can go lower. It's just when it's constant, and we are constant in some districts. So the SI is intended to be a benchmark to evaluate service demands on the patrol staffing. We still have some work to do internally to examine the impact of the SI on our community. What does it mean if we can't have an officer free to walk around downtown? Does it make any difference? So what do we want? An important part for us is the proactive patrol, and we're going to continue that goal. We just have to figure out how to get there. We need to examine what calls we respond to and how that affects our time usage and ability to provide proper services to our community. We might be reaching a point that we have to start looking at the calls that we have historically gone to and say, we just can't go to those anymore. We do believe we're a full-service police department, and we want to keep that way, but we may be reaching the point that we're not able to do that. And we also have to make a decision if we need to reallocate or realign personnel to reduce the SI to get them in the neighborhood of 60. And we also have to decide, is 60 right for us. You know, we had discussion about, you know, 1 officer per 1,000, that is the standards that's used. Is that right? Well, in some communities it is, in ours, not necessarily. But once again, is 60 right for us? So we have to decide that.
So, going back to page 23, the workload analysis, and looking at the patrol division, the officer power shift.
Yes.
You've got 2 of those indicated here, but you really didn't call those out when you were talking about this. Could you describe that position?
Sure.
And the importance of that position?
We have, because of the 12-hour shifts, we have officers that come in at, for example, they work 4 days of coming in, 2 days of coming in at 5 a.m., going home at 5 p.m., or coming in at 6 a.m., going home at 6 p.m. Then another shift, another squad comes on from 6 p.m., either 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. So we have 24-hour coverage of our manpower. What we have done is taken some of the officers off the squads. Are busy, as you know, early in the morning, we don't need 6 officers out there most of the time. Sometimes 6 officers is not enough. But so we pull them off and we put them in. For example, they come in from 11 to 11. By agreement through contract, we can move that a couple hours as we need with 7 days notice. It's not an immediate change. So we have we have the squads that are working from 6 to 6. And then we have 2 officers that are coming in at 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. to cover for those overtime, that'll cover for those busy times. That also allows them to, so one of the officers can go in and write a report and still have officers out there. Our goal is eventually to have 4 across the bottom with power shifts, so that all of our squads can, because these are squads that are working per day, but every squad can have a power shifter to cover it. We do the same type of situation down in the jail of having 2 correctional officers per squad and then an overlap that comes in to assist them. And then if someone takes a vacation day off, that overlap moves to a different, maybe come in at 5 or 6 o'clock to cover that. Sorry, I took your job. Talk a little bit about our community. We are a safe community, and it has a lot to do with the citizens in our community. They do call us. They don't call us all the time, but they do call us and let us know when things are happening. As we look at our 2012 crime rate, please remember that 13 numbers will not come out until first quarter of 14. So this is comparing 2011 to 2012 crime rate. And we had a decrease of 5.3% in our calls. In our, what is classed as Group A, which are our major crimes, and also Part 1 crimes, which are homicide, rape, burglary. It's a long list of what we class as major crimes. Statewide, it's just went up 2.6, but it does show that we have a pretty good, a low crime rate. When you look at crime rates per 1,000 people, that means out of 1,000 people, 46 of them were victims of some type of Group A crime. It's not a good thing that we have 46 of our citizens that are victims, but Washington crime rate per 1,000 is 72. I was looking at some benchmark cities and in turn some other cities in the state, some very small cities that are down around 10, 11,000 people. One of them in particular had a crime rate per 1,000 of a city of 11,000, and they were 115. So if you want to be a safe person, you would not want to live in that kind of town because you're a good chance you're going to become a victim of a crime. Of course, some of our issues are drug issues. And I grouped alcohol into drugs just because it kind of flowed nicely. But we still have continual issues with alcohol and juveniles, and we work with our liquor control board to have specialized enforcement in our bars. We do that on a regular basis, looking for underage drinkers. As you know, we've had, since the alcohol has been allowed to be sold in stores, we have a huge theft rate in our stores. And we know some of that alcohol is ending up in juvenile. Quite a few of the stores are looking at that as just a cost of doing business issue, and we're trying to tell them it's not. It's really a situation they need to work with us on so that we can reduce the alcohol that is stolen out of stores. Heroin is an issue not only in the city of Issaquah, it's in the Puget Sound, and it's in the complete Northwest. We have been addressing heroin since it's raised its ugly head again a couple years ago. Last year, a street crime detective worked several cases, made several arrests on people selling heroin. But we do know that heroin is in our community. And I'll say it again when we get down to mental health. We cannot arrest our way out of drug issues. People look to us as saying we got to resolve this problem. It is a community problem. It is a society problem. We are, we're the ones that are responsible to deal with it, but we just cannot arrest our way out of it. We've tried that over the years, and it has not been successful. Rainier Trail has been an issue from what people told me even before it was paved, but it runs in cycles where people go down on their Rainier Trail and do what they do, but they don't affect the quality of life of people that live along the trail. We are seeing now a uptick of quality of life issues. We do have heroin down there, certainly, and we do have working with all of our resources down the Rainier Trail. We put in a large amount of time on the trail. Parks Department puts a lot of time in the trail, and PWO is down there on a regular basis also, just trying to address some of the issues down there. There was a question asked, and I wasn't going to talk about it right now, kind of what we've done, but as you asked the question, I'll kind of just tell you a little bit of what we've done since the first of the year. And that's when our complaints seem to start climbing again, was the first of the year for us. As a department, since January 1st, we have had 278 documented proactive patrols in those areas, certainly more than one a day. This does not take into account the number of times that our school resource officer, has been down on a trail with, or it doesn't count Parks Department, or it doesn't count when the principal from Tiger Mountain is down there with our school resource officer. We've had 20 drug-related calls down in that area, and that is from people seeing drugs being used or suspecting that drug is being used. 9 trespass calls where people have either been trespassed from the area or asked us to remove people from the area, which we've done. 15 property calls, which includes theft from the community center, Rainier Trail, and the skate park area. We've also recovered 2 stolen vehicles. We've had vehicle prowl calls and other stolen property that had occurred down there. And we've had 43 suspicious vehicle or person calls where someone's walking down there or driving by and they see something that's suspicious to them. And so that's the number of calls that we've had. Skateboard park. If we remove the skateboard park, that problem's not done. It is just a part of it. But a large number of our numbers are the skateboard park. Since January 1st, we've responded to 159 calls or walking down there, however you want to measure, but 159 times we've dealt with issues at the skate park. 50 entries in our Spillman system for the Rainier Trail, and 40 entries for the community center, whether it's people sleeping outside or they're inside causing a problem or whatever the issue is. So we have been putting a lot of resources down there. Commander Beerbaum has met with a lot of people that live in that area, talking with them about, and I know Joe's been involved in some of those discussions, of trying to just come up with, instead of just wait until the cycle comes again. What can we do for the long term to resolve the issue? And I'm sure over the years we'll reduce it. It will come back, and we'll just have to continue to find ways to. But it's going to take a partnership with the school district, the community resources, the police department, city, everyone to put some resources down and figure out what we're going to do to resolve that. Okay. Well, again, thank you for your help and assistance over the years. We're certainly going to be asking for it in the future. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be more than happy to respond to anything that we can. And I have my resources here, both Commander Conrad and Commander Beerbaum, to answer any of your hard questions that I can't answer.
Questions? Tola?
I'll just mention, I just appreciate so much Officer Wee and her involvement at the high school. I have a high schooler, and you know, it's a twofold benefit. She, you know, obviously is doing a lot of hard work to try to minimize the problems associated with Rainier Trail and the skate park. But I think it's also getting kids used to seeing police officers as friends and allies during a time when a lot of authority figures like parents aren't necessarily seen so. So I think that's a great program, and I just tell you as a parent how much I appreciate it.
Good. Anyone else? Well, Paul, thanks for that pretty comprehensive briefing, and thanks for an update on what's going on the Rainier Trail. I know that you take that serious. It's really a tough one to deal with, and it's not very obvious to many of our citizens all of the attention that really gets, and the seriousness that you and your officers give that on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, where are we going now, Bob?
Great. So thus far, we've done the police department, which is about 25% of the general fund, and we've done the development services department, which is a little over 10% of the general fund. Now we're going to a department which has a much smaller expenditure, but a much larger outcome on the city, and that's the economic development department. So primarily, our director, Keith, is going to be talking about the revenue side of the equation. So obviously, there are two aspects to a healthy community. One is the cost control and how we're expending our money. The other piece is growing our tax base. And the Economic Development Department, we talked a little bit about the reorg, is a completely new business line that got created as a result of the reorg. So we didn't have an ED department before. It got really put fully functional in place in 2012, and we just got to full staffing this year. So Keith will talk a little bit about his department and then the revenue side of the equation.
So after 2 hours of budget discussion, I'm not quite sure why I'm back here, but I am. So hopefully the change of focus will do everybody a little bit of good. So assuming the computer will wake up, there we go. So as Bob mentioned, my department budget's pretty simple. There's 4 positions. There's not 24, 31, 63, and I knew that was going to happen. So I've got... what I'm going to spend the time tonight talking to you about is not so much about my budget proposal, but really more talking about 2 of the pieces of what my department is working on, to kind of give you a little bit of a glimpse under my tent, and also hopefully to give you a little bit of extra to think about during this budget season. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is economic profiling. And really what that is talking about our community. And, you know, we've said it before, you know, I'm going to kind of keep bringing that kind of information forward, because I think until we all have a clear picture of what our business community is, I think we need to kind of keep pushing on that. The other piece is talking about increasing our tax base, and I think that has a direct correlation to the budget discussion. So getting into what I've called economic indicators. So workforce population, we talk about our overall population is somewhere around 30,000. When you look at the group that is in our kind of working class demographics, we're about 20,000 folks. highly educated. When you look at high school graduates and those with bachelor's or higher degree, it's a big portion of our community. Our median family income right now is above the county average, and our unemployment rate is really low right now, 3.7%. So part of this is giving you a sense of kind of who our community is, and some of the information that we don't have, which we'd love to have, is, for example, what is the average range of salaries for jobs in Issaquah? That's a different number, obviously, than what are people making who live here, because a lot of people who live here don't actually work here, and that's some of the information I think we're trying to get to. That information doesn't exist anywhere. We would have to go generate that information, and so part of what we're going through right now is seeing what kind of information is out in the community and what we would actually have to go get firsthand if we want to get it. So next piece is vacancy rates. Everybody says, so how's the community look? What's the vacancy rates? Right now, where our vacancy rate is just under 6%, and that's a really low number, actually. When you look at different cities and what their commercial and retail vacancy rates are, under 6% as a general development rule of thumb is a point where people start to think about building spec space. So we're at a spot right now where it should be fairly appealing for certain developers to look at our community and build space without tenants. Another thing is, another point on here that I wanted to highlight was the current leasing rate for office space right now in the community is somewhere between $20 and $44 a square foot. And looking at some properties in Bellevue primarily, because I think we see that as kind of our main competitor for office space, it's about the same. So we're generally on par with Bellevue in terms of what people are paying for office space. Here's just a handful of kind of the leasing activity that happened in the last kind of quarter of the year. So you can see triple net is running anywhere from, say, $15 to $38 a square foot, depending on where it is and what kind of deals were made. So John mentioned a lot of these. I call these the opportunities. These are the things that are out there. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are kind of the top of the pyramid. So Microsoft, Rowley, Lakeside Swedish, Costco Talus, Sammamish Park Place, Space Labs, Albertson Mall, Gilman Square, Bellevue College. Hopefully you all know where those are and what I'm talking about there. So now I'm moving on to taxes. So in looking at the budget, 23% of our revenue comes from taxes. And of that, you've got sales tax is 36%, property tax is 33%, and B&O tax is 11%. So those three taxes are really what I'm going to focus on in my conversation tonight. So looking at B&O tax. So what I've done is provided our B&O tax rate, Bellevue's B&O tax rate, Snoqualmie's B&O tax rate, Sammamish, Kirkland, and Redmond. And what I'm really showing here is just there's a different level of what's being charged to the community. And even though right now it looks like Bellevue and Snoqualmie are about the same, Bellevue actually has a little kind of hook that goes beyond what Snoqualmie has. And they actually have a square footage tax in addition to their B&O tax. And what it's for primarily is for headquarters, major offices, and other businesses that don't provide gross revenue for that community. So it's a way to kind of get those businesses that aren't generating a lot of B&O tax. Kirkland and Redmond, they've chosen an employee tax instead of a B&O tax. And it's just a different way to go about it. Renton also does an employee tax. So looking at, here's our, basically a breakout of our employees. And this is a little bit old. These are 2011 numbers. So we're at about 20,000 employees now. So our B&O projection in the budget is $2.75 million. To give you a comparison, if we just went to what Bellevue and Snoqualmie charge, that 2.7 would grow to 4.3, And if we chose to go on a head tax like Redmond and Kirkland, the number actually goes down to 1.9248. So part of all of this in my head, what it's doing is starting to say, well, which one of these are the most beneficial for us? And not for us today, but for us 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And as we start to increase our employee density and start to change from maybe more of a service-based employment group, which you can see here, we've got almost 12,000 employees that are in the service industry, to something that's more office-based, if that is indeed kind of where our SWOT analysis and our kind of focus takes us, you know, do we want to think about changing what we charge for B&O, or whether we want to shift to an employee tax in lieu of B&O? So these are some of the things that I think we're starting to grapple with as we kind of look at the future and where the city is going based on the plans that we've approved. So changing property tax. Property tax, so right now the budget says we're expecting $7.3 million from property tax. And most of the time when people talk property tax, they think about residential property tax and how much, you know, we pay as homeowners, most of us are. But really, what's interesting here for me is talking about really how much value we get from non-residential development. And what I did was I provided you just 3 examples of properties that basically developed what they were assessed at prior to their development and then what they assessed at afterwards, to show you kind of as we start to look at redeveloping some of our properties down on the valley floor, kind of how the valuation is going to change for us as a community and what that ultimately will mean in terms of value gain from a property tax standpoint. So this is a big deal. And, you know, there's question marks here because at this point we just don't know the breakout and how much of it is residential versus non-residential.
Fred?
Oh, I'm running to sales tax.
Oh, sorry.
Back?
How is it that we don't know how much is residential and how much is commercial?
Because we don't.
Is that information not available?
It's not available to me. Our finance director might know that. We couldn't come up with that number this week. So,
so
if
write it down as a question, we can get that, because we do have the commercial versus the residential piece.
All right. So I'm moving to sales tax. So sales tax is actually it's a composite of retail sales, construction sales. There's other things like personal services and other things. So, but retail sales is kind of, for us, it's the biggest piece of this. And actually, in the past, construction sales tax, as we were growing kind of really rapidly, given our villages, construction sales tax was a bigger percentage of our total sales tax revenue. But it's actually kind of waning as some of our growth is slowing. But, you know, what this shows, and as I look at the first chart, you know, our sales tax increases and decreases kind of mirror King County and Washington, except that it looks like we kind of swing a little bit wider when those shifts happen. So when we dipped a little harder, and when we rebounded a little harder. So, you know, just kind of looking at how that affects us in terms of kind of the bigger economy. And then when you look at the per capita sales, you know, I think when you look at kind of the decline from, you know, about $38,000 per person down to more like, you know, 22, you know, what that's showing, I think, is it's showing the recession, but it's also showing the annexation. So, you know, what this is reflecting is basically us bringing some of the county residents into our community, because now they're showing up basically as counting towards our per capita sales. So you know, I think what it's telling me is that as we're kind of balancing out in the $22,000 per employee, you know, we're still about, you know, twice what the state and the county are, and that's good. That means that our community is spending more on sales taxes than generally across the state. but, you know, it looks like we're probably leveling out about 22 grand. So, my last slide is, you know, here's our kind of three tax streams: retail, B&O, and property. And they're kind of all just running a little bit north of horizontal. You know, one of the interesting things that I came across is, you know, as we look at from a sales tax perspective, a retail tax perspective, electronics and sporting goods are up. One of the reasons why, you know, so you start to say, why did Dick's Sporting Goods want to be here? They did because we're spending a lot of money on sporting goods in Issaquah. You know, it also would point out that maybe another electronics store, but I don't think there are any left. So, you know, those are the things where you start to say, okay, those are looking up, and building materials and apparel are down. So if you're going to open a new shoe shop in town, you might choose Bellevue over Issaquah. So these are some of the things that I think we're learning as we kind of get into this to a greater degree. And with that, I ran through my presentation, and I'm done. So any questions? Awesome. Thanks.
You got off pretty easy, Keith.
I figured if you go late and you talk fast, that's bound to happen.
So I do have a question. It took me a second to get to the document.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's probably easy, but you're just going to I'm going to ask you to connect some dots for me that are in this preliminary budget, just in your section on page 4-37. So the you know, the personnel line costs swing quite a bit. Could you just give me a narration of what's happened there over the years? It's probably going to be a review for most of us, but I appreciate it.
So the reason why this year was a kind of a dip, if you will, is that we delayed in hiring our second ED manager until I think she started in September. And part of the reason was the finance director and I had some conversations about revenues, and it was important to me to not bring that person on board until I was sure that the revenues were there to fund the position. So I think why you're seeing the 2013 number as being below what was budgeted is because we held off on hiring that second ED manager until September. Did that answer your question, Paul?
Yeah, and so that then ongoing that accounts for the increase in the 2014 because it's staffed all year.
Yes.
And so that it's just the delay. That's it. The whole story. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
You, for a prior year accomplishment, developed interim Issaquah marketing materials. Would you refresh my memory on just what those marketing materials are?
Sure. So the realization was that for us to be competitive in attracting businesses, we needed to have some information about our community that we could give out. The website's a great thing, but people like to have physical documents. And so, you know, as the mayor and city administrator and I went to go pitch Issaquah to a company wanting to locate in Puget Sound from Canada, we had to kind of make our own up. And so the idea was that until we can get kind of some permanent marketing materials put together, which will be hopefully sometime next year, that we would do something in the interim to be able to hand out to prospective businesses and employers that would kind of showcase Issaquah. And so what we've envisioned is kind of like a folder that would have different inserts depending on what they would be interested in. We could just kind of plug and play. And we've got some bids from different contractors, and we're working on that, and I think hope to have that done by year's end.
And so there are two major efforts underway. If marketing is one of those, but the other is around tourism. And so what's the linkage between those two and the difference between those two?
So tourism, I don't think we know that yet, and I'm gonna explain that. So part of what we're working on, so we finished up the SWOT analysis earlier this year, and the next step is to work on a strategic plan with the Economic Vitality Commission. And part of that will help inform not only the comp plan update, which we're is running kind of hand in hand with, but also will, I think, help us develop our brand and our information for which businesses would be strong for our community, and if there's a certain potential cluster of businesses that we might want to market to, those kind of things will come out of the marketing effort. The tourism piece is going to focus more on lodging stays and developing Issaquah as potentially a tourist destination. Now, there could be some similarities there. If, for example, from a marketing standpoint, we see that one of the biggest strengths is outdoor recreation, and we're having an outdoor recreation forum on November 5th, that you could potentially decide that that is your niche, and that would directly relate to tourism as well, potentially. So they may be connected, they may not be connected, we don't know yet, but we'll know next year, I believe.
Autumn, I know that, I don't know if you want to speak quickly to what is proposed to be funded out of the LTAC fund, but there's a multiple pronged effort, I think. So your work with the chamber is a big part of that on the tourism piece.
Yes.
And then the city has also undertaken a program through social media that will be focused on tourism for this upcoming year. Want to just speak for a minute on what we proposed on that?
So we were speaking about interim materials. Another thing we need in the coming year is some help on tourism promotions online. So we proposed something through the LTAC committee this year that was approved to be coming to council, I think, at the next meeting. You guys will review LTAC proposals on creating 3 or 4 videos that promote Issaquah and promoting those via social media, so we can target people specifically through social media on where they live, what their interests are, and even on their Google searches. So say they are looking for something on where to stay in Seattle, they could also maybe have an Issaquah ad pop up with a video too. So just some interim materials before we get to the larger plan in the coming year.
So it sounds like next year's, we're going to see some major or somewhat significant things rolled out around the topics of tourism, marketing, because it seems like there's been a lot of discussion in the community for the past year and a half or so, and it's hard for me to get a grasp or to understand all of these individual pieces that are flying around and what the finished so I do hope there is some way to pull all of this together.
And the chamber and the city are working really closely together on the tourism business plan, and that will take a year to get finished. So this was an idea to kind of get us to the next step because we're already pretty behind when it comes to promoting Issaquah to tourists. So this was a kind of an interim step, and then a lot of the video footage we'll be collecting over the next year can be used for future efforts in tourism too. So it's just kind of the start to get us going, kind of what Keith was talking about with the marketing materials for ED. It's something to get us to the next year until we can have some more final products. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Keith or Autumn? Paul?
When you're ready to move on, I have a question.
I'm ready to move on.
Just, Joe's got more
Joe.
topical.
I'm just curious where economic vitality is going to be going in the next year, the commission. Or do you have anything set up specifically for them? Yet?
So we're going to talk about, I think we creatively called their agenda housekeeping this week. And part of it is to talk about everything from bylaws to work plan for next year. My thinking at this point, and they haven't agreed to it, is the big piece of their work effort will be doing a strategic plan. So basically saying, okay, in the next 2 years, what is it that we need to do from a policy standpoint to bring forward to the council to really kind of move the business community in the right direction? So that's the plan. So if they like it, great, that's what we'll do. If not, then hopefully they have another idea.
Paul, did you have something?
Yeah, so moving on, I guess for you and Bob, as much as anything, where are we in the agenda for tonight's meeting?
You have that list?
I wasn't sure if we're in big picture overview still, or we've gone on to general fund revenues and expenditures.
Yes. Keith has saved me some time because I didn't realize he was going to be talking about some of the general fund revenues. So we're moving on to the general fund revenues and expenditures.
Okay. All right, thank you. Yeah, I wasn't, because it was feeling like a department review, and it wasn't in, the previous section, big picture overview and programs. I wasn't sure what was actually unfolding here.
I think from that perspective, long-term, one of the questions I think we need to ask council is, as we direct the ED department in developing tax base, we want to make sure our tax policy and tax structures are consistent so that we can maximize whatever tax base ends up getting developed in the city. So Keith talked about the fact that with Central Issaquah plan, we're going to see a lot more office development. And it's certainly a diverse part of our tax base, but we have opportunities there. We're very competitive with what the taxes are to date, but there's opportunities to maximize overall growth. So I think that was the intent of Keith's presentation, was to make sure that tax base growth and revenue are consistent with wherever the tax policy ends up being.
Yeah, I'm confused by the agenda we published. I'm just wondering where we are. It doesn't say departmental review here, which with this is what this feels like. So I'm just wondering where we were.
Oh, I think that's where we were. There's the 3 department reviews.
Oh, okay. It just says big picture overview.
Okay, so what had been sent out earlier in the agenda bill that we got done I guess maybe isn't as clear on the agenda that Joe just showed me. But we are going on to the general big picture overview. Yes, programs and services. Yes.
Well, let's do it then. Oh, Tola?
I just want to point out, you may want to update that photo. I don't think the IPD is using a BMW R-Series bike and a Harley-Davidson anymore. I think they're both ST1300s.
I knew that.
That's impressive.
Thanks for catching that, Tola.
Certainly.
Okay, let's move on.
All righty. Well, actually, we're doing very well as far as timing is concerned. So kind of concluding the night, we're going to spend the last part of the conversation talking about general fund revenues and expenditures. And a lot of it, a lot of the revenues have been covered. I want to talk a little bit about the general fund in more big picture. It is the one fund that people tend to be the most interested in because that's where a lot of the provision of services are, because that's where your police is, that's where fire is, and planning and development. But what's really interesting is that the variability doesn't exist in the fund, because the fund and the type of services, and because it's primarily personnel, if it's doing anything, it grows very slowly, versus a capital fund from year to year can have a lot of variability depending on the projects that are occurring in the fund. So going on to the first slide, and Keith was kind enough to cover a lot of this, is 66% of the total revenues in the general fund are related to taxes. And then you can see that we have a multitude of other revenue sources. And we have probably several hundred line items of individual revenues, but then when for purposes of presentation, we combine it. But On taxes, which represents 66%, I would say there are about 9 or 10 categories that make up that 66%. So it's typically the old 80-20 theory. 80% of our revenues is coming from a very small number of categories. And then breaking that down, you can see that 37% is retail sales, 31% is property, and then we have the B&O and utility tax, which really are quite similar because they're gross earnings tax. And then we have a small category of other, which is our leasehold and gambling tax. So that makes up the revenue sources for the general fund. Here, the next slide is a review of the historical information as well as moving forward into the future. And so in order to get the change percentage column, what you compare is the 2013 budget to the 2014 budget, just so you can see the change. The estimates are where we sort of look into our crystal ball and say, based upon what we're seeing today, where do we think we're going tomorrow? On property taxes, the reason it goes up by more than what one would think is the 1% is because we also get the increase as a result of new construction. So the difference between the 1%, the 3% and the 1% is basically the addition of new infrastructure to our property tax rolls.
Is the distribution with property, B&O, and sales tax, in your experience, is that a fairly similar distribution to other communities? Are we high or low in a particular area of those primary types of taxes?
It's very interesting. That's a great question. It's a lot depends on the policy of the council. So in our case, I would say looking at our property tax, because we enjoy one of the lowest one in probably, the Pacific Northwest region, we're probably lower on property taxes. But in all, we have a somewhat reasonable balance. If you compared us to some Mamish, they're probably 60% property tax, 60 or 70% property tax. I would say we're probably more reflective of a Bellevue or a city of Seattle. So having that 30-30-30 in and around there is reasonable, because then basically that helps buffer you against particularly recessions, so you have that balance there. So the more you can have the balance, the better you could weather the bow waves and the changes. Sales tax and other taxes, it's one of those things where I just want to say what a difference a day makes. Well, in this case, it's what a difference 30 days makes. When we did these preliminary estimates, we were assuming a rather robust economy through the end of the year. GDP was expected to be growing at third quarter at around 3%, and we were assuming some growth next year at about 4.5%. And so, but unfortunately, we have some other issues occurring in Washington, D.C., and those will have a rippling effect to us. They're already beginning to have discussions saying that GDP, they're beginning to believe it's going to be at 0% for the last quarter of the year. And so when the gross domestic product isn't growing, then you're not seeing the offset increases in sales tax and particularly B&O taxes based upon what the other businesses are doing. So if I could say for sales tax, particularly at this year and maybe even going into first quarter, I would say we need to be a little bit more cautious about our revenue estimates, just because at a national level, it just naturally ripples down into the local level. When you look at the difference between 2013 and 2014 sales tax, a couple of things. When I met with a group of folks that we worked together on sort of looking at sales tax estimates, as I indicated, we believe that next year we were going to continue to be pulling out of the recession, that we're going to be seeing some growth. We're seeing that we're doing Less exporting, we're doing more importing. We were seeing some really positive signs. And so we were estimating about a 4.5% growth in overall sales tax growth for next year. Additionally, included in our numbers is the increase in sales tax that we believe that the potential increase in sales tax for the Highlands area. So we've put in around 200,000 to 300,000 in growth for next year, in particular for the Highlands area. So a lot of it just simply, you know, like sales tax is out of our control. It is all dependent upon the consumer. And so like I said, I would just sort of put this one on a watch. On our other taxes, particularly utility tax, we are seeing some decreases in the amount of tax that we collect on telephones because of cell phones. We don't receive as much money. And so we're seeing some declines there. We're not seeing as much growth as we traditionally have seen in gas. Electric continues to hold pretty steady. A lot depends on, once again, what Mother Nature brings to us. In some ways, when we have a hard winter, then we see more in gas and electricity because the consumption simply goes up. So we take out those highs and lows when we do the forecasting on the utility taxes. But, you know, once again, it's one of those things that it's outside of our control. You know, the only predictable of the three big sources of revenue is property tax. You generally don't see large delinquency rates here in the city of Issaquah. I know that in another city I've worked in, you know, we would plan on a 4 to 5% delinquency factor. Here we enjoy a better payment of people's property taxes, and if you haven't paid your property taxes for the second quarter of the year, by the way, they're due at the end of this month. Licenses and permit, we are some of the growth here is primarily as a result of our anticipated increase in permit-related activity out of development services. So that difference of around 300,000 is due to what we believe to be growth there. Our intergovernmental revenue, that holds pretty steady year over year. You're not seeing a lot of variability there between the last 3 years. Charges for services, that has been growing over the last...
I'm sorry, I have a question. On that, you mentioned permits. Does that assume that the city goes forward with the proposed changes to the permit fee structure?
The calculation for the 2013 does not include the incremental proposed differences in fees. It just assumes when you got your sneak peek, we use that as the growth factor based upon the sneak peek.
Thank you.
Charges for services in that category is where you'll see a lot of our jail revenue, some of the municipal court services revenue. We backed off that number in, also our recreation is in there. When we were looking at our 2013 projected revenues of 6.4, you can see we dropped at 200,000, and that even assumes some growth. When I was going back in and particularly looking at recreation services, jail services, and some municipal court, it looked like our 2013 revenues and 2012 revenues were a little bit ambitious, so I tried to do a course correction. In 2011, we had, in 2010, particularly recreation and jail had kind of a phenomenal year, and so when the future budgets were developed, they were assumed that that ongoing 2010 good year was going to be occurring into the future. We didn't see it in 11, we didn't see it in 12, and we really didn't see it in 13, so I backed off on that revenue assumption.
And that's recreation or recreation and?
It's three main categories: recreation, the jail, the number of bed nights in the jail, and some of the municipal court revenues.
The good news is there's less people in jail. The bad news is there's
Yeah.
less people in jail,
Yeah.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's been a big, and I think there's more competition generally in the region than we saw a few years ago.
And I think, I know like in August or September, they were averaging 30 bed nights. And they recently have had, in September, they had some 66 bed nights, and our capacity is 72. So once again, you know, it is, you know, we'd love to say come on in, but, you know, it's just a matter of, it's outside of our control. Fines and forfeitures, you can also see, I did put a note down there based upon some information as a result of what we're seeing as of August 30th. We believe the 2013 numbers and the 2014 numbers can grow about $80,000. It's one of those good news, bad news stories. The reason this number has been dropping over the last several years is our revenue from the camera at the school district. So in the early years, we were generating lots of revenue. Our whole purpose in doing that was to improve traffic and safety in that area. So the good news, it's working. The bad news is we're not seeing the revenue that we used to see in that by the school. So already this year, we're seeing about $200,000 less revenue than what we had anticipated, and it's just simply one of those things where the number of citations aren't occurring. So it's sort of like years ago, it used to be false alarms. It was kind of a good news, bad news. We got a lot of revenue from false alarms, and pretty soon nowadays we hardly get anything. So it did exactly what the council had intended to do, was to slow the traffic down in the school zones. And then miscellaneous revenue, it's been pretty consistent over the last several years. And then the last column is transfers in. In 2013, there is a budget of $1 million. Of that, transfers in $750,000 comes out of the LID fund. In 2014, we're anticipating a use of that of around $400,000. So of that $697,000, $400,000 is from the LID guarantee fund. So that's sort of big picture on revenues, unless you have any particular questions.
Actually, this might be a two-part question, but you just mentioned the LID guarantee fund.
Which we're going to talk about next session, but ask your question.
Yes, I was surprised to see that. I thought we were moving away from using that fund as a potential source of revenue. So that's a comment. I didn't expect to see that based upon prior discussions.
Yes, part of it is we're looking towards 2014 to do more of a course correction, and we would anticipate by the end of the year, the city administrator, Bob and I have been having a lot of conversations, because part of the challenge is when we started looking at revenues through August and September, we were a little surprised that we weren't seeing what we had anticipated. So part of it is just using this as a bridge in order to give administration some time to come back to council with a course correction for future periods and figure out how do we go about, getting us back on track. And part of it, and some of it is part of it was when I was really beginning to dig in and look at the revenues, I was surprised to see that some of the revenue estimates that we had built from last year were a little higher than what I had hoped they would be. And so that course correction sort of hit us in August and September without a lot of time to really make a whole bunch of changes.
Can you share, in what general area, when you say the revenues aren't expected in August and September?
Well, some of it had been the red light. We had met with the police department and the municipal court in August to say, what's going on here? Why are these revenues down? And so it wasn't really until August or September that we started, because it takes so long to really see that when you have first and second quarter, the numbers, you think they're down. So part of it was that, and recreation was just simply understanding how, because their revenue, it doesn't come in 1/12. I was sort of making some assumptions as I was learning their revenue stream, is a lot of their revenue comes in the summertime, and then it kind of tapers off as you go into the winter because they're not offering as many programs.
So I guess the question is, when we looked at that, it was a matter of cash flow. So you could cut 400,000 out of the budget, or as we look at our projections for this upcoming year, we've got a balanced budget. We had to find some way to close that $400,000 gap, and this was a transfer. And so as we've done in previous years, we looked at, first thing kind of off the line in terms of any revenue enhancements that we see over the year is reducing that transfer in, because that transfer in doesn't happen in January. I mean, it's one of the last things I think we probably do.
Well, so we budgeted 750,000 for 2013, and you're projecting 0.
You know what page you're on?
Yes.
3-1, I think, or 3-2.
That's correct. And I think, the previous finance director said that often at times that wasn't unusual, that typically, like in 2012, I know the previous finance director had budgeted, I think, like 700,000. And when we ended the year, because of the departmental underspending, we drew down the ending fund balance only by 200,000. I think the budgets for 2013 are, we've spent a lot of time, I know Beth Ann has been spending a lot of time on the expenditure side. We're pretty comfortable with the numbers and where departments are going to end up. We did have a couple of things that, when we talk about expenditures, we hadn't planned, they weren't planned for in this budget. They had been planned for in the 2012 budget, so we'll talk about the expenditure side too.
So in general, well, no, let me back up just a little bit. In order to have a long-term sustainable budget or finance plan, we would not be using the question is, would we be using the LID guarantee fund if that was our goal?
No, you're correct.
So it's a good indicator. There would be a few of what a potential structural deficit would be. So the good thing is, we're not anticipating using it for this year. But I think when you start to look at that, that would be one of your canaries in the coal mine. Is what is that number long term? And I think the goal is obviously to reduce our costs and increase our revenues such that that imbalance ends up in balance. That's right.
And so we're using the LID guarantee fund to help us balance the budget this year. And to what extent are we using the ending fund balance to help us balance the budget for next year?
So that's a great question, and we have a slide on that. Is that the next slide?
No, that's slide number 37.
All right. Do you want to jump ahead to that, or do you want to get
I would, because I think this is an important topic to talk about.
Okay.
So we're now on 37.
Yes.
Because I see the two as related.
Right.
Because it's an well, it's sort of the canary in the cage, as you said, so 35. Okay, so
what this is overall is, there was an early question from one of our council members about the change in fund balance. And so in preparation for tonight, what I took was, we have 31 funds, but what I really wanted to do was to focus in on the funds where the more significant variations were occurring. So you can see here in the general fund, we are, when you look at the general fund, we are using 423,000 of ending fund balance in order to balance the budget. The street fund is using up some of their existing cash also. And then you can see the $400,000, which is the transfer to the general fund. So in total, between the two of them, it is $822,000, assuming the spending proposed revenues and expenditures. And I can do the rest of them if you'd like, or we can come back to them at the end.
Right. So to get to Paul's question, really, all cash isn't created equal on these
Right.
funds, right? So the ones that you got to be, mitigation dollars, they accumulate cash because that's how they work. You pay mitigations when you do development. So you usually will spend down cash reserves in that fund. The ones that you've got to be the most concerned about are the general fund and the LID guarantee fund, because those are the ones that make that determination as to whether, how close your overall budget is in bounds. What'd you say?
Paula?
Well, I also think it's true that, each of these funds, there's on section 2.6, each of these funds have revenues associated with them and expenditures associated with them. But taken as a whole, it's also true that we now have 2 years in a row where we've had budgets where we've proposed having ending fund balances that are on the order. The previous year was $7.5 million less than at the beginning of the year. And this year, we're now looking at a proposal of $6.7 million. And I get that, some of these funds are there to be spent, but it's also true that, we talk about having a blip this year, but this is, along with perhaps more strongly the general fund, to your point about a point towards whether we're on a sustainable path or not.
And I guess, our ending fund balance is going to be 21% of our general fund, which is pretty substantial in a way, but ideally we would not be tapping into that to balance the budget.
Right. I mean, the alternative is to raise taxes if you wanted to raise additional revenues. And so sometimes you can offset that. And in a sense, if you took the 1% increase we've not implemented since 2007, that would be about $400,000 if you add that up over those 6 years. It's about, how much is it again? 65, 70,000 per year?
68,000.
Well, that's not an option in front of us.
No, I'm just saying, yeah, that's.
I just think that if you look year over, now seeing 2 years in a row, our general fund, last year we had a budget that proposed reducing it 5.5%. We didn't actually cut that much out. But if you look at 2 years, the last 2 years together, you wind up with the general fund going from 8.15 million down to now 7.55. That represents about a 7.5% reduction, and so you now see 2 years in a row of having to decrease that general fund. And again, to your comment about canary in the coal mine, it starts to beg the question of, are we right-sized currently? And our city administrator mentions, you can increase taxes, you can also reduce expenditures, and nobody likes to do that in a stable and prosperous city. But it's just a conversation we have to have as a council. How many years in a row do you get to, with these sort of changes before you say we might not be sized exactly the right size? Now, it so happens that 5 or 6 of the current council members will be here at the next budget cycle. So maybe this isn't something we have to address this year. And maybe we wait a year to see, but maybe it is. And so I saw these numbers and it kind of struck me.
Well, I think we need to talk about it. Paul?
Yeah, I'm giving this some thought as well, and I know one of the things I noticed in this preliminary budget is we're right at this point where we're adopting new financial policies, and in this document we have the old policies still, right? They're printed in here, and of course within in part of the formation of the new policies, we address the issue of the percent, right? At what percent expenditures in ending, or cash on hand, or whatever you want to call that. And obviously where we've been at 20+% and what we are establishing as policy, and I don't need to go exactly what I think it's in front of the council right now, right? And can you help me? So we went through services, they came back, and where are they right now? The new financial policies.
They're on the agenda for this coming Monday.
It's next week? Right, okay, so that's going to be in regular business next week. And so I was thinking to myself, all right, we've said, we've reiterated publicly, we've talked about what percent we want, and we're way above that. What we didn't talk about is how we're going to, or if we're going to transition from where we are now. And it just occurred to something above 20 to maybe 15 now. And I think that's a good conversation to have. Now, if a budget showed me that some of this, so contingency didn't happen, so I thought that was going to happen, so that doesn't account for any part of it. And then I would be looking next for some type of capital spend that really helped us acquire an asset that had similar worth of what the spend is. And I don't think that's here. I could be wrong, so point that out to me. But so this is largely when we haven't really gotten to all the capital plans right now. So so I look forward to hearing more about that. But if it's there, please point it out to me. So so these are the thoughts that I've been having, because if like Tola pointed out, if we're going to have a lower ending fund balance, what are we getting for that? And is it an indication that we're still planning to spend more than we're taking in, and we have this emerging policy of maybe shooting for 15%, even though we're already at 20. We haven't talked about how to get from 20 to 15. All of these things are in the mix right now, and give me some help understanding what we said we're going to do and what this represents. Let's just be real candid about it. And if there's something capital-wise in there, as we're acquiring an asset that's going to be very valuable to our citizens long-term, tell me about it.
So I'm going to ask either Bob or Diane to frame the question that we are trying to ask, so that you've got it captured, and so that we can nod our heads. Yep, that's the question that we would like to have answered and have some discussion around.
So one question I heard is what should cash balance be? And we've got a policy that's there. And then the question is related to that is how do you get to that level at what point? And there may be some level of comfort being higher than that, but that's one of the questions that I think.
Okay, well, there are two. You said two.
I did.
But I don't think I've heard the question around the long-term financial sustainability.
So, yes, directly related to that, you can see there's a gap. And so there has been a gap. It's been kind of ongoing, and we've tried to ratchet down some of the expenses as we can that are ongoing.
Right.
And then we have managed, I think, relatively well on the revenue side. I mean, it's been stable, even coming out of the recession. But you want to kind of help me frame that, Diane?
Well, I sort of, I guess what I heard is we're on a road, but where is the road going, and help us understand what it looks like going down this road. So basically, you're seeing us use up the LID guarantee, plan to use up the LID guarantee. So how much of it is ending fund balance, and how much of it is a structural deficit, and where we're going, and what does it look like?
Yeah, and I would add, speaking for myself, I have a general sense of the council, just my own personal take on it is that there's consternation over using ending fund balance to balance the budget. And so but this is the proposal in front of us. So, sell me on it.
There you go.
Justify this to me, please. And I'm sure you've given a lot of thought. You've put the numbers together. This is a pretty extensive document. I know you've been working on it for months. So help me understand why. What are you trying to do? And that's.
And I think that's a pretty, that's my question too. Help us understand why we've chosen that route over other alternatives.
I have I guess a detailed question. I'm looking at page 3-16, and it says ending. It's got two charts. One is ending fund reserves in dollars. That's ending general fund, right?
Just the general.
Okay, so then the number below, it says ending fund reserves as percentage of total expenditures. I think that's supposed to be ending general fund as a percentage of ending as a percentage of ending fund. 316. What's the numerator and what's the denominator on that? Because it's not ending. It's not clear to me what 20.9% is what divided by what from the summary of expenditures and revenues by fund.
It is the reserves, the
Ending
total
fund balance.
expenditures divided into
The ending fund balance.
ending fund balance.
Well, total expenditures for the year is 98 million, right? 98
No, general fund only.
general fund. I'm sorry. So it's a 7.5 over the 36.14. I got you. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So I think you've got three questions.
Yep.
There. And so we got a little bit out of sequence when the LID guarantee fund showed up. So get us back on track, Diane.
Okay, so I think we have gone over the revenues, I think sufficiently for tonight with the idea that we'll be coming back with more further detailed information. So just maybe to give some highlights and some perspective on expenditures so that we can see how the two of them relate together, if there's additional questions that need to be framed together. As I indicated earlier, you know, the majority of our expenditures in the general fund are personnel. When we provided the departments with budget instructions, their discretionary items, which is, 39%, we provided them with a 1% increase. So the majority of the increases in the general fund are really related to salaries and benefits. And part of it was originally in, we had to carry forward in June, when I did the original forecast, in particular, we didn't know what the outcome of the bargaining with the police department was going to result in. And that's, so we've included that in there. And then just some of our increases in medical and dental, that's 3% to 1%. And then one of the bigger ones is we had a significant increase in our retirement contributions, which was really outside of our control. So we've been Bob and I have begun to have some conversation about, salary and benefits and what does that look like into the future. At this point in time, we don't have any recommendations to bring back to the council, but over the last 30 days, we've been having some early discussions about, okay, if this is where the majority of our expenditures are at, what does the future look like as far as this particular account? So going into the next slide on the detail, there's a lot of detailed information. So once again here, when you're doing the percentage change, originally I had used the 2013 estimate, but there's so much anomalies, one-time occurrences in those that it was really starting to skew the data. So I went back and did a comparison of the 2013 budget because that would assume 100% spending as compared to the growth in 2014. So when you look at the percentage change, Please remember, one of the opening comments that we had talked about was a lot of these changes are a result of a redistribution of insurance and utility costs. And you can see the biggest difference if you go down to non-departmental. You can see that it went down by 18%. And so that 400,000 was redistributed back up into the departments. Do you have a question?
I get that. This page is a little bit different that's in our document.
Yes.
It includes 2011, which is great. It also has the percent change. But you're line for line tracking with the document until you get down to Parks and Recreation. You've got economic development, and I've got a line for economic development in the budget document. And then you have two more lines, Parks and Rec and non-departmental. But the budget document's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more lines.
That is the divisions within the Parks and Rec.
So what you're calling non-departmental there is, okay, wait, that's the other general government services here.
What page are you on?
Somewhere in the general fund expenditures. I'm on the electronic copy, so 13-14. 3-14, excuse me. Okay, so you're calling non-departmental in the budget document, it says other general governmental services, and then from Parks Planning and Administration through facilities rental, city facility services, recreation services, aquatics, park facilities maintenance, so those all roll up to Parks and Rec on those numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And you can see that the totals agree.
All right. Yeah, the bottom totals did. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So when we look at the legislative, you can breathe a sigh of relief because of the 12% increase. 11% of that increase is attributable to us charging you for your portion of insurance. So, you're home free.
That's the cost allocation model.
Yes. That's the start of allocating insurance based upon the worker hours that we pay for our liability insurance. So we have several different components of our insurance. So we have a liability insurance that's based upon a 5-year rolling average of worker hours. And for council, it's pretty constant because we just use an average. Then we have automobile, and we actually went in and looked at the individual ownership of each of the automobiles and then charged it out to the particular funds or departments. Then we have property. So then we went in and looked at the individual properties, figured out who owned it, charged them. And then we have crime and fidelity, which is very small, a couple $100. And then we have boiler and machinery, which is a couple $100. So we went in and allocated those through various formulas to all of the departments. So your percentage increase is primarily due to your worker hours. When we go into court, 5% of the increase is related to insurance, and then the remaining difference is when the budget was built in 2013 for their court security people. The department had put in a request in 2013 for $36,000. The budget only included $25,000. So when we were working with the court administrator, we realized that we didn't give her sufficient funding going into 2013. So that incremental increase is to fully fund her for 2 quarter-time security officers.
I have a question. There seems to be in some of these funds a pretty systemic or continuing difference between actuals and budgets. And I look at one of our larger funds like Parks, right? So you've got 2012 actuals and 2011 actuals, 2012 actuals, 2013 estimates, 6.5, 6.8, 6.8. But then you've got 2013 budget is 7.4, and then 2014 budget is 7.8. So part of me looks at it and goes 6.5, 6.8, 6.8, 7.8, holy moly. But then your 6% is comparing it back to what the 2013 budget was, which doesn't track to either the 2012 actuals or 2013 estimates. So how does that work? How does that, as a plan, as this is a for us getting our arms around parks numbers.
So if we just jump right to parks, the biggest increase is insurance, because the largest portion of our insurance bill is for property. Property all sits in the city's facility fund. So if you look at that, let's see where they at. Parks facility maintenance. So part of it comes from the reallocation. So the difference between the 7.3 and the 6.8, I think they're holding some positions vacant. Yes, they've been holding at least 1.5 FTEs vacant, 2.5 FTEs.
I mean, I look at the recreational, I look at the recreational services and aquatics breakouts. There's an extra $600,000 difference between 2014 budget and 2013 estimate. So that's a lot of money.
Well, on the aquatics, we know about 160 to 170,000 is the reallocation of utilities.
Just go ahead and break that out as a question.
Sure.
Diane?
Well, I'm sorry, can I
go
just
ahead.
finish? I'm not trying to nickel and dime just this piece of it. I'm just trying to say, as an elected official, again, I look at 6.5, 6.8, 6.8, 7.8, that's a big difference, right? But then I look at, okay, if I say 2013 budget versus 2014 budget, it's not as big of a difference. But if I look at actuals for the last few years and then the 2014 budget, that seems to me to be a more fair way to look at it, especially if there's a trend line. It's not like 2013 estimate is an odd blip compared to 2011 and 2012.
+1.
Provide the breakout on why that jumped the way it did.
Well, we're calculating a percent based upon budget to budget, but the actuals, I'm more interested in, what do we think, what do we really do in 11? What do we do in 12? What do we think we're going to do in 13? Now, okay, now what are we planning for 14? So the percentages, I think what Toll is saying, if you look at parks, yeah, the difference between in 2013 budget and 2014 budget may be 6%, but the actual difference is going to be quite larger than that. I mean, between the actual of 2013 and the 2014 budget. That seems, and so I think you already addressed this, Diane. So my tendency would want to compare an actual to what I'm going to budget for next year. And so, but you didn't do that. And I think you explained it earlier, and maybe for my benefit, you could explain that again.
You guys sort of jumped way ahead of me.
Okay.
I was going to kind of, in my mind, I had logically going, okay, I know what the next difference is. So
I'm sorry. So there are a couple questions we're doing. I think Toll's
Yeah.
question is a good one as well. And I was going to suggest, Fred, that as the percentages indicate, we can talk about if that's the right calculation for the percentage. But there's a story behind every one of these numbers. And it seemed to me that you were trying to just recall some of those. So
some notes.
so Bob, I think that I would just really like, it would be whatever the percentage calculation is, there is a change in 14 compared to prior years. And there's a story behind each one of these. You mentioned insurance being allocated back to the department, or you talk about a position that wasn't funded because. I think those changes will really help me internalize what's different.
Okay. But so my question is, where are the actual increases coming from? Because reallocations, you're going to take them from one place and put them in another. Those aren't actual increases.
Right. But when you look at the bottom line overall, you're only seeing between 2013 budget and 2014 budget, assuming full staffing of all of the employees and everything, you're only seeing a 1% increase.
But we've got an overall decrease in employees over the past few years. So have we seen an overall decrease as well?
Well, between 2013 and 2014 budget, it's assuming when you build the budget in 2014, we assume that the existing positions would be funded at the beginning of the year. Plus, we added in the 2 new positions that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
We then did the reallocation of utilities and insurance, which is really like you indicated, it's a wash within the general fund. So the question I'm hearing, and then, so you have, if you look at 2013 and 2014, you only grew 1%. Then the other question I'm hearing is, okay, so help us understand what happened between what you think you're going to end up in 2013 versus the variance in 2014. So you're asking two different questions, two different answers.
So my question, and maybe I haven't heard the answer, but I thought I saw in here that we had an overall decrease in employees from like 270 down to 255 or over the past few years? No? Is that wrong?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So if you take out the wash items, and you still have a 1% increase, I just want to
So you
understand.
get salary increases, for example. So look
Okay.
at the big drivers up there. You know, start with police department, 7.4 million back in 2011. It's 9.3 million estimated for this upcoming year.
Okay.
The other big one is fire. And actually, if you had gone back a couple years from there, that number would have been even smaller. But, you know, 4.6 to 5.063, that was a result of the District 10 annexation by Bellevue. And that's actually supposed to go up to 5.8 million by 2015 because of some of the other changes with the reallocation of the station net onto May Valley Road. So those are like outside of our control.
Right.
But they're driving a significant piece of the cost. Whereas in other areas, we've been able to make certain reductions. The other piece is when you do the expenditure amount, it's also part and parcel related to the number of programs that you run. So on Parks and Recreation, for example, and I think it would be helpful to have Ann here to explain some of this, but there was a change of like $200,000, I think, in charges and services for the pool, for example, from 30,016 to 220,150. I don't know if that's that insurance that you were talking about on
Yes.
that piece or not.
Yeah.
The other thing
Utilities also.
we tried to be cognizant of when we did this budget for the pool is if the bond actually gets passed by the public, we got a pool that's going to be out of service for
6 months.
6 months. But unless we got two options, we can lay everybody off, or we have to find work for them during those 6 months where we're not producing any revenue in other departments. So that cost, I think, is built in. Is that built into the budget or no? I can't
It was
recall.
not,
It was not.
because we didn't know at the outcome of the election.
Okay.
And so anything to do, with the exception of one transaction, anything to do with Klahani and anything to do with the Parks bond measure were not budgeted except for one capital.
So, just a second. You had a question, Tola? What was your question? It was pretty much the same as Paul's. So, do you have Tola and Paul's question?
Yeah, I think we can spend some time
Look
at the
at-
next one and answer those questions and do
Well,
it
I'll
comprehensively.
provide
Yeah.
something in writing was probably the best way to do it. Okay, and now, Stacy, your question?
I just think it would be helpful to have those reallocated monies backed out. Maybe, and maybe not for anybody but me, but it's just hard to look at that and know
Right.
Well,
what
would the
all is
answer-
in there.
Would the answers to Tola and Paul's question give you what you're looking for?
What's your
Yeah.
question? What's the question?
The question is, why the significant increases? And some of those
Sure.
increases are
Yes.
because of the reallocation of insurance, electricity, and gas.
So,
Sure.
so if I may, Joe, real quick, in that, I can look at the bottom line and answer your concern, as it feels to me. I can look at the summation, and say, I know that it's just been redistributed across a couple lines in here, and say, okay, I can look at that and feel comfortable with that. And just to clarify what you said too, to me, my question was about change, someone up, someone down, just tell me why.
What are the
It wasn't all just
drivers?
about increases. So I cut Joe off, he was gonna try to say something.
Okay, Joe?
Well, I think we have two alternatives. One is to raise revenues or to reduce expenditures. And when you see expenditures going up, you wonder, are they going up because of something that we need to look at so we can reduce them, or are they going up because we redistribute them or things like that? And that's always the problem that we have at budget time, is trying to figure out exactly what it is that you're presenting to us, that you work with every day, that we see, 4 or 5 times a year, and try to figure out, okay, are we doing it right? So when you look at something like, and I agree with Paul, when you have to get the right perspective to get the right information you're trying to get. And when you look at something that's gone up by 11%, you don't correlate that with something that's gone down. And any place along the line that we can understand why something went up, that is something we have control over, or why it went up because it's something we didn't have control over, like fire and police. Those are the things that really help us. And those are the kinds of questions that we're going to have every year, it seems like. So anything like this that can somehow in future years kind of be, you guys live it, we don't, unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which way is better to look at it.
The truth of the matter is, you ask the same question we ask when you take a look at it.
You're correct, and part of my reasoning for even putting this up here was to have this type of a conversation. My observation last year was that the visual wasn't as clear as to what was going on, and so this conversation does not surprise me at all. I had sort of anticipated it, because this is really where you're making your decisions, and I wholeheartedly will do what I can to help provide you with information in order to help you make the decision. So this conversation is not surprising me, because when I looked at it, I knew, number one, there's a lot of changes, and there has to be comfort in what those changes are, and number two is we have some challenges that we need to be working on. So very, very comfortable.
I just want to restate, Paul mentioned, each of these has a story and what's the story, but just to be real clear, I look at the overall number. That's not a 1.3% increase. I don't look at 35.6 versus 36.1. To me, it's a 4.5% increase because it's 34.5 versus 36.1. And if in fact we consider the 1% property tax increase as we're being requested to do, I really need to understand better if I'm going to go back to the citizens of Issaquah and tell them why I considered raising their taxes, why there's that 1.6. And to just put it back to parks, I don't view it as a 7.4 to 7.8, 5.3% increase in parks. I view it as a 6.8 to 7.8, 12.5% increase in parks. Thanks.
So, one potential policy question that I would have, which I don't think we should debate or discuss tonight, since it's almost bedtime, is whether the general fund should be balanced. The overall budget is purportedly balanced when you look at pages 2.7 and 2.8, although interestingly, the ending fund, as in every single fund in the city balance, drops by about $6 million. It somehow works itself out very nicely where you end up with $138,364,874. But funds themselves are due to drop about $6 million. Well, the general fund is the biggest fund in the city budget. And the subtotal, when you look at pages 313 and 314, you have the 2014 budget with an expenditure of $36.1 million, and on the revenue side, I have to go over to your revenue chart here from page 32 of the slideshow. It's at $35.7 million. So there's a delta of $422,940 in general fund expenditures over general fund projected revenues. And interestingly, that happened last year in the budget as well, 34.7 compared to 35.6, but back in 2011, that wasn't the case. Revenues actually exceeded expenditures in the general fund. And so it would be potentially for one of our future budget sessions here over the next couple of weeks, a policy decision or question as to whether the general fund should be balanced as a fund, given that that is one of the largest drivers of the overall city budget. And then, you know, take it as you will how you do that, but it's about a $422,000 gap.
So I appreciate that summary a lot, and in a way, that's what I was asking too. In that,
We had that
yeah, and I mean, that's a good way of saying it. We're balancing it with ending fund balance, by using ending fund balance. So tell me why. And so, but that could be part of a policy. I'm not sure we're gonna formate any policy during, I don't know if you.
Well, I mean, we've done it before, you know, find a way to cut $422,000.
Okay, when you said, okay, so just for.
That's a very fair.
So just for clarification, so in terms of objectives for this council as you know, outcomes from this deliberation, we want to achieve, and when you said the word policy, I guess I was thinking capital P, you know, something that's going to be part of an, you know, agenda bill somewhere, you know, here are our financial policies. But you mean for the objective for this budget deliberation? Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I would just and I'm going to repeat myself, but understanding, you know, what, you know, like I say, sell me. You know, there's this difference, why are we doing it?
We've talked around this same thing for quite a bit, and the hour is getting late. So where are we now, Diane?
Well, I guess I would recommend we sort of put in abeyance the general fund expenditures until we can provide you some additional information. Because I think you probably have questions, and what I'm hearing is you have questions in pretty much all of the area that we just need to provide you with the detail. So I'm not sure that there is a need for further discussion there.
Okay.
If I gave a little guidance too, just, you know, as you work, I know you got a lot of work to do. There's 5 areas on your chart on page 34 of your handout, this one. A quick, you know, back of the napkin ad of police, fire, development services, parks and rec, and non-departmental come up with over 29 million of the 36 million.
Yeah, it's where all the money's spent.
Yeah, I mean,
Right.
it's those, but what I don't know is how much of the change they represent. They're the biggest chunk of the total spend, but how much, but, you know, that was just suggested guidance on where to focus.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to tell us this evening, Diane?
Well, maybe we could just go through the last 2 slides in particular, and they're more, page 35.
Okay.
So, Human Services, this is what the Human Services Commission had recommended for last year. It was a 2-year recommendation. So these are simply the funds that have rolled forward. They equal $280,750. When you apply the mayor's recommended increase to the 9%, there's about $8,000 additional. In working with the Human Services Commission, they have yet to make a determination on who they would want to recommend providing that additional funding to. So that is an outstanding item that we would have to hear back from the Human Services Commission on. And then the last slide is Services and Safety met at the beginning of the month, went through and made a recommendation for nonprofit funding. I believe it comes forward Monday night.
Yes, it does.
It comes forward Monday night. That portion of their recommendation that is related to the general fund only, because there's a couple of their recommendations that are related, that are part of the capital fund, are shown here on slide 36.
So Arch would be the capital fund, and that's why it's not on here.
Right,
Along with
and
the zoo
and zoo and the theater. Those are in the 24th presentation because they're capital funding. So So this is just the operational portion of those nonprofits. Then we've already gone through Josh's question we went through on slide 37. And then the rest of, we really didn't talk through, but the other funds are really capital related. And so the question, you know, part of it is because it really looks like the city has in the past wanted to do a pay-as-you-go versus an issuance of debt. As these projects come up, it is difficult when you're doing a construction project to say, you have $1.5 million a year. Some years the number's going to be higher, some years the number's going to be lower. A lot depends on where the engineering department is in the design stage. In this particular case, we're having a lot more bricks and mortar construction versus design, where a lot of the design work was occurring this year. So that is part of the reason that you're seeing a use of this cash, because we're moving from design to construction. It always costs more to build versus design. And then the last one we've already gone over, so we've gone through everything.
Bob, anything you want to say?
It's been great.
Do you really believe that?
I do want to take a minute for Beth Ann and Autumn to run through your questions, because I think they've been tracking on them tonight to make
I
sure
think
we
that's a
capture
good
what
idea. And
you
then
wanted.
after that, I'll see if there's anyone in the audience design. Okay. So, go ahead.
So I appreciate the presentation that we got from Chief Ayers, and I appreciate all the numbers on reflecting all the work that they're doing out on the Rainier Trail. But I think the plan, the goal was to define a plan to enhance the Rainier Trail, and I haven't heard anything about that plan. And so my question is, what is our work plan for defining that plan?
And so you are on page 2-23. And it is the Rainier Trail goal.
2013 goals.
And the question is,
What's our work plan
What's the
for
work plan?
defining the plan?
So I think, if I recall, this was primarily concerned about the overall sense of safety along the trail. And so that has been part of it is partnering with the Issaquah Community Network to do a regular walkthrough of that area. And then the other piece has been, I think, what the police department talked a little bit about to enhance the overall safety. And I'd be happy to talk to you a little bit more about that. But in terms of physical improvements, other than potentially moving the skateboard park, which you guys approved an agenda bill on that.
Sure.
That's the only physical improvements that were planned in that area.
Well, we can talk about it some more. I just don't see that we have achieved that goal, because the plan to enhance the walking between 2 and 5, I mean, that's great, but that's just 2 to 5. And I think what we talked about during the goal-setting session was it being a community effort, and so partnering up with the schools and, along with some of the things that we're doing to find a way to make that better. And I don't think we've seen a plan, so that's my comment.
Okay. Noted. Questions?
So this is the fun part of the night where I try to summarize everything that you guys asked.
You can do it, Autumn.
All right, here we go. So what's the policy for cost recovery of parks and recreation programs? What council goals will be accomplished in 2014? What are the specific costs for each goal in 2014? What goals from 2013 are still being carried forward? Provide a fact sheet on DSD that includes a summary of the savings of the reorg and an explanation of the expenditures versus revenues displayed on a certain page in the budget. What is the commercial and residential property valuation in the city? Describe why the general fund transfer is included in the proposed budget over other options. What should the ending fund balance be? How do you get to that level and at what point? And then provide descriptions or stories to the percentage changes in the general fund expenditures. And then I have a few other notes for later discussion. Should we move up the hire date of the human services manager? And should the general fund be balanced? Did I miss anything?
What are we trying to achieve in this session? That last one.
I didn't hear you, Paul.
The last one you mentioned, should the general fund be balanced? I think the question was, what is this council's objectives for the 2014 budget in terms of, is using end of fund balance and LID guarantee part of
Right.
that?
Yeah.
Does that capture it in the minds of everyone? Okay.
I'm sorry. Can you tell me again the part about the section that we had specifically on the general fund? Can you tell me what takeaway you have for that?
Describe why the general fund transfer is included in the proposed budget over other options. Or are you talking? Oh, provide descriptions or stories to the percentage changes in the general fund expenditures.
Okay, I guess that sort of an element of that is also the whole 2013
Yes,
budget
14.
versus 2014 budget versus 2013 actuals versus, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Everyone comfortable with the question? Okay. Is there anyone in the audience desiring to comment this evening? Wow.
So my name's Connie Marsh, and I live at 1175, no, I don't. I feel like I am. It's Halloween. I'm at the store a lot, 1175 Northwest Gilman Boulevard, Suite B11. And a couple of good things. It's in the council chambers, so I didn't have to sneak through locked doors and up a narrow hallway into a teeny tiny room. And it's on TV. And somebody actually gets to say something at the meeting. So all of that, I think, 12 years later, I'm very happy. 1 in 12. Good. And it was a good discussion you had tonight. I read the budget, and then I went back to the CIP. And so some of the things that I have going on is the CIP pages aren't in this budget that conform with the budget like they have been in the past. And then when I went back to look at them, they don't correlate. So in order to understand what's happening, it would be nice to have consistency there, because as a person who's read a lot of these budgets, it really helps to know what they're talking about. I think the whole thing with the ending fund balance is what's most striking to me are all the trend lines, and the trend lines are down. And if we're looking at expanding like we're looking at doing, and we're expanding using downward trending ending fund balances, I think that's really scary. With a town that's doing really well, I mean, I don't know if you were noticing how well Issaquah has done, that we are still fighting that. It just, to me, shows that we have not yet learned how to fiscally manage our city appropriately, because we're exposing ourselves to these potential variations in economy more than we need to. So if I was to, as a citizen, express an opinion, it would be that we should never have to donate to the ending fund balance. In order to create a sustainable budget, we have to figure out how we are going to even out our revenues so they aren't all sales tax oriented. If we get more, like Keith was talking about, if we get more office, we need to have a way for the office to pay for themselves, because right now, they don't really. The services in retail have their B&O tax, which add a lot. But if we get massive employees that sit in an office, they may go eat lunch or dinner, but we don't really have a way to pay for their impacts on the city each and every day. And I think we have to learn how to change that if we are going to grow as y'all have decided we're going to grow, because it's not going to work the way we have the funding model at this point in time. So if you would consider that as you go through the budget. And also there's this concept of debt. And when you look at the debt charts in there, you can see that we do seem to be getting into a position where we can afford a little more debt if we continue with this stable situation. And so what is it that you really want to spend money on to make the city great, right? When you say, are we actually spending money on something large to make the city better? Sorta in this budget, but is it the right thing? And what is it that would make our city great? And those are the kinds of conversations I rarely hear around the budget table, which is if we were to prioritize the most important things to help our city be the best city it can be, what are those things and how do we get to those prioritized items? And because right now the mayor is presenting you, I don't know, feels sort of splintered, a little here and a little there, half-funded things here, half-funded things there, borrowing from ourselves a little bit to get a little bit done. And I don't know that that's been very successful in the past. And trying to figure out how to do that, I think, is important. I have lots and lots of detailed questions that I'm not going to bore you with now, but I'm likely to send them to you so that they might be helpful so that you can phrase your questions. One of the things that Autumn said, I didn't think matched Stacy's request, which was in the reorg, how can we have reduced our employees in theory, yet still we're spending the same amount or more money? And I make the assumption that we've hired consultants to do the work. I don't know that that's correct. It doesn't really show in this budget who the consultants are, where they are, and how much they cost, and whether that's... Oh, I'm sorry. I'm done. If you understood that last comment.
I think I did.
Okay. Was that already 5 minutes? But I was so enthralling.
5.5 minutes. But thank you for coming.
Yes, I hope I don't have to again.
For the good of the order, very, very short. I know the hour's late. I just want to do a very short for the good of the order. Issaquah lost a really huge ally this weekend when Vicki Hoffman passed away. She was the first chair of the Drug-Free Community Coalition, and I'd met with her a number of times. She was just a fierce advocate for child safety, and it was a really tragic, untimely, unexpected passing. And she's survived by her husband Stan and daughter Ashley and son Kyle, and just wishing them all the best as our city will go on looking for working for child safety, but unfortunately without her.
Thank you. Thanks for those comments. Our next committee work session is October the 24th, 6 o'clock here in council chambers. Josh, I know you will not be here because of a previous commitment. We're scheduled, this is sort of our second budget review. The general fund continued, cash balance, contingency fund, LTAC, art fund, human services, enterprise funds, street fund, and capital funds. Is that correct? That's from the agenda bill that accompanied the mayor's proposed budget. So if there are any changes to that or any special briefings on individual department budgets, please let me know so that we can talk that through and manage our time. And so I guess a general question, Bob, do you plan on providing responses to the questions as you develop the information? And will those responses be posted with the budget on our website, or just?
They will be.
Okay, good. So anyone tracking can see what's going on. Great. Is there any other business before we adjourn? We are adjourned.
So I'm just sending you a reminder. Josh, I'm sending you a reminder. You got any questions or issues?
Thank you.
Yes.
That's right, don't take somebody else's.
I wrote notes in my budget